Driving test chaos. What's the craziest thing a kid has done while taking the driving test? There was a license center next to the sporting goods store I worked at. A lot of people would come there and practice before their test out front in the straight-on parking spots. A young lady, who only had her permit, managed to mix up the gas and brake and drove right through the front of the license center. I was told later that she was even more upset when they wouldn't let her reschedule her test for the following day, since they cancelled her test she was pulling in to take when she wrecked the whole front of the building. It wasn't long after that they installed a bunch of bollards in front to protect the building. I was amazed at how marked up they'd gotten in the first few months. The kid I was testing answered his phone. Yeah, I'm taking my driving test. This nerd doesn't even know how much green herb I just took. My driver's ed teacher said that one kid reclined his seat all the way back, put one foot on the gas and the other on the brake, and grabbed the top of the wheel with one hand and said, "Let's go." I heard about a girl in driver's ed who was driving on the interstate with the teacher and 3 other students. The teacher commented that they'd missed the exit, but they'd just get off on the next one. I'm not sure what the girl's thought process was, but this girl pulled into the grass and tried to go against traffic to go back to their missed exit. The teacher had to use her brake on the passenger side, while the other 3 students screamed bloody murder. When I went to take mine, the tester waited until I was at an intersection and then yelled, "Turn left!" She scared me, so I did, and I failed. Yeah, afterwards I was like, maybe that was a test to see how I do under pressure? Not good though, apparently. When I went back to try again, she was just ripping into this girl and her mum in the parking lot. I was like, at least I'll get a different tester because she's clearly busy. I asked my tester during my full license test what was the worst thing someone had done. Apparently, there was an older gentleman who drove through 3 stop signs before the tester told him to pull over. The gentleman explained that he didn't want the license, but his family was pressuring him, so he ran the signs on purpose to fail. He made sure no cars were coming first, though. Okay, I get that, but why on earth was this fellow allowed to plow through 3 of these things without his instructor grabbing the wheel and screaming for their dear life? Okay, I've just realized you likely mean that he passed 3 signs instead of physically ramming the vehicle into each of them, but the question does still kinda stand. When I was sitting my test, I asked the tester how many tests he did in a normal day. His answer was 10. Not all that surprising until he followed it up with 10 and 8 will fail before making it out of the car park. I asked him to elaborate, and apparently the vast majority of test sitters will fail for administrative reasons like arriving late to the test, not bringing their existing learner's licenses, or having a vehicle that wasn't road legal. The latter was more common than it sounds, when all lights and turn signals and horn stuff is tested in the car park before the test itself begins. Fail any of the above and you've wasted your $75 and never even got into gear. While I was waiting for my turn to do my CDL test, I watched a guy in a semi back into a light pole, and instead of seeing what he gently backed into, he just gassed it and knocked it over. Needless to say, I didn't get to take my test for an hour or so while they cleaned that up. Listen, a lot of kids make minor mistakes, and yeah, some do make scary mistakes. However, it's the adults that scare me the most, especially the seniors who are up for re-exam. Probably the worst test I've ever been on was this man in his 90s. I instructed him to turn onto a street when it's safe to do so, and he turned, narrowly missing a pedestrian. Not only that, but he was driving on the wrong side of the road. He came head-to-head with another car who pulled over to let him go. He was laughing about it because he was under the impression that it was a one-way road. When I got back to the office with him, I cut the test short and got him back the quickest and safest way possible. He was astounded when I told him it was not a one-way street. I said, "Did you see any one-way signs?" "No, but I assumed you were going to take me on one." "What?" My best friend was coming to a 4-way stop sign in our small rural town. The tester said to go straight. So she did, without stopping at the sign. Just drove right on through without batting an eye. He basically told her, "Well, you failed if you just want to drive back." Last year I was making a left turn at a light and a car swerved into my lane and hit me. Turns out it was someone taking their driver's test. I'm not exactly sure how drivers test car insurance works, but the instructor told me we had to wait for the police and take details of everything. I'm assuming that driver didn't pass. I went forward instead of in reverse when the tester was standing in front of me on the curb. I failed. One of my classmates in high school failed his driver's test 6 times. During one test, he hit a pedestrian. Opposite kinda story here. When I was taking the driver's ed, I was in a car that had the brake on the passenger side for the instructor to use just in case. Going 35 down a fairly busy street, my car all of a sudden comes to a complete stop. In horror, I look over at my instructor who's sound asleep with his foot on the brake. I just sat there dumbfounded. After a couple of people honked real quick, he shook himself awake, mumbled a quick, "Oh, just accelerate," and sat up adjusting his glasses. So that was fun. Yes, I did pass. The guy was in his 70s and just didn't care about anything. My grandfather used to be a tester. He had one girl forget which way to turn the steering wheel, and they ended up in a ditch. I should have technically failed mine, as when I did my turn across the oncoming lane, a car was reasonably close coming towards us. We were back at the registry, and the tester says, "Well, I could have failed you there, but it was raining, there was a dark low cloud, and it was a black car without its lights on coming over the crest of a hill, so I gave you the benefit of the doubt." Well, fantastic, I think. So that afternoon, I go for my first solo drive, and as I'm pulling into a shopping mall, I completely miss a pedestrian crossing sign and nearly run someone down. I slam on the brakes at the last second, and I'm apologizing profusely, and she's just staring at me. It was the woman who did my test. She just shook her head and walked off. Thanks for the benefit of the doubt, though. My dad was friends with a guy who worked for the registry giving the road test. His best story was of a kid who took his test while it was raining. He started driving without the windshield wipers on. The guy figured he was nervous, so tried to give him a break, saying, "It's raining pretty hard, huh?" The kid was white-knuckled on the steering wheel and just said, "Yep." Again, trying to give the kid a break, he said, "Don't you think you should do something about that?" And the kid said, "Yeah." Apparently he didn't know where the wiper controls were, so he rolled down the driver's side window and stuck his head out. At that point, he had to stop the test and fail him. Took a test with a girl who drove on the wrong side of the road and took a left turn into oncoming traffic, all in the same drive. It was through my school, and she was banned from taking it through the school because of that. Okay, 3 stories. First, my ex drove a geo-tracker, a tiny car. She pulled right into the parallel parking area and fit in so unbelievably easily, the tester made her do it properly. A girl in my driver's ed failed her test when she went to the DMV because she turned into oncoming traffic. Not only was there a grass median, there was some of those skinny red and white poles for about 10 feet followed by a guardrail. Each side of the median was 3 lanes. There was really no way to miss it, but she did. And on a lighter note, I did the backing up 100 feet part. When the tester told me to, I stopped, and before I put it into park, he asked me a few verbal questions, and then proceeded to give me directions to leave the area and back into the parking lot where the parallel parking test would be done. Never put the car into drive, pressed the gas, and the car went flying in reverse for about 20 feet. He apologized and said, "Oh, my fault for distracting you. As far as I'm concerned, that never happened." In my local area, a guy in his mid-20s failed the test for some reason. At this point in time, the results of the test were shared in the car. After being told, he proceeded to get out of the car and grab an axe out of the trunk. I don't know any more details beyond that, but apparently that's why the results are shared inside the licensing building rather than inside the car. Isn't it satisfying being the reason that a rule was created? Seriously, that is intense. Although I guess this implies that it was his car. Was he about to smash through his own window? Or drag the person out first? Because I can't imagine that he'd have room to swing that thing from inside the vehicle. So many logistical issues for this particular attempted murder. Kinda the opposite of your question. Actually, the worst thing a tester could do. Gets in my car, which is a little hatchback. He's a huge man and he can't fit. He says he'll fail me unless I get a car he could fit into. And within 15 minutes, otherwise my slot will be gone and I'll have to rebook and pay again. Luckily, my dad was 5 minutes away, who came with his sedan. Disaster averted, or so I thought. The instructor asks me to do a U-turn on a farm road. It's a single lane each side with a ditch on either side. It's impossible to do based on turning circle of the car. I attempted the largest possible angle, but due to the ditch on each side it ends up being a 3-point turn. He asks me if I'm deaf and if I know what a U-turn is. Politely trying to explain that it's not possible, which I'm sure he knew. I completed the test and passed everything else. He failed me and told me to come back when I learned to drive. I rebooked the test the next day and passed with a different instructor. This was in 2005. Fast forward 15 years and he's actually in the news and sentenced to jail for accepting bribes. In hindsight, he made a comment of some sort of reparation for not fitting in the car, and that makes sense now. My 80-year-old great aunt. The tester kept telling her to speed up. After a few times, she said she can't see the speedometer, so she doesn't know how fast she's going. He made her pull over, and she didn't receive a renewal. Thank God. In short, drive extra careful around pharmacies. It's usually crowded with old people, and that's one of the few places those people need to drive to. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? When I parallel parked, I hit the pole behind me. The tester said, "It's fine, that should be an automatic fail, but I think that's a little harsh." Then I hit the pole in front of me head-on. Did not pass. My old driving instructor told me about a kid that pulled into the drive-thru at McDonald's, ordered some food, and then realized he left his wallet in his other car. He was using the instructor's car. He wanted the instructor to pay for his food and said he'd offer half of his fries in return. The wallet also contained his license, so the instructor failed him on the spot and told him to get out of the car. In Canada, you can do your driver's test in any car you choose because, in theory, you should be good enough at driving to not need an instructional car. So this car didn't have dual pedals. My dad did testing for a few years, and he once had a girl stop on railroad tracks. There was a train coming, slowly, but it still takes them a long time to stop, and it blasted the horn right into the car, passenger side with the window open. This just made her freeze up. He had to reach his foot over her side to hit the accelerator. He couldn't explain why she stopped there. I suspected she started going over the tracks, and then the signal started going off, and she just froze up and hit the brakes instead of getting off the tracks. But he didn't ask for her motivation, he just failed her, and I suspect got out of that car as soon as he could. I'm not a tester, but I watched my at-the-time know-it-all son do the California roll through 3 consecutive stop signs as he was exiting the courthouse parking lot at the beginning of the test. The tester stopped the test and failed him on the spot before he even got out of the parking lot. My son's excuse was, "Well, I thought the test hadn't started yet." My father used to tell of when his dad worked at the Massachusetts registry. One story he told, and I'll change names because of the internet, was there was this kid taking a test who was awful, but the kid was really stuck up. Somehow he'd gotten my grandfather's name, so after the kid tried to act all slick and pull all the strings, going, "I know Chuck Lafitte," my grandfather, giving the test, says, "Oh really? You know Chuck Lafitte?" The kid's like, "Yep. No you don't, because I'm Chuck Lafitte." The kid did not get a license that day. This reminded me of the moment I had during my final test. The tester had an arm injury and was wearing an arm brace on his right arm. I took a left turn way too hard and caused him to accidentally hit his arm against the door. I was just like, "Oh, frick, I'm so sorry." Surprisingly, he passed me that day. Maybe he didn't want me to come back. To be fair, that maneuver likely wouldn't have been bad enough to fail under normal circumstances. It seemed worse only because of his injury. It would have been unfair to judge you harsher because of it. I was the kid, and for transparency's sake, it was a driving lesson, not a test. We had to do 6 scheduled drives with our instructor and had a partner. One would drive for 30 minutes, then would just stop and switch so the other could drive back. The rule when you got in the car, just so it wasn't a constant game of should I turn, was that you always go straight until the instructor tells you to turn. So one Saturday, we had an early drive scheduled. We met up at the school, and I was the first to drive. We got about 5 minutes in, turned onto a main road, and the instructor quickly fell asleep. My partner and I, quietly, with a smirk, agreed that we'd still follow the rules. We took the road for about an hour and 15 minutes until it dead-ended and you had to turn. I pulled over in a parking lot, and we woke up the instructor to ask him which way to turn. It took a good 30 seconds for him to realize what had happened and where we were. He yelled at us both to get in the back seat, and we witnessed some very unsafe ways to drive as we headed back towards the school. And I didn't bat an eye. While taking our CDL test, I was sitting in the sleeper area, and the guy actually taking the test ground gears when shifting. He immediately let go of the steering wheel, causing the proctor to have to grab the steering wheel and drive for the 5 or so seconds it took him to recompose himself. I've got a story from back when I was a beginner driver. My mum used to take me out on the road so I could get practice. I had my license, but was still green. On a certain crossroad, my mum sees someone cross, ignoring the red light. Looking at them, she sardonically says, "Sure, this red signal doesn't apply, let's just drive ahead." Being too focused on driving to notice the tone of voice and interpret this as something other than an instruction, I did exactly that. I drove straight past that red light. Good thing it was nighttime, so there was next to nobody on the road, but it was spooky after the fact. Wow, you should join the military. They're always on the lookout for Forrest Gump types who can and will do literally anything someone tells them to do. I imagine your mother had stern words with you for the rest of that drive. As someone who worked in a DMV for many years issuing licenses, even though I wasn't a license examiner myself, I think I'm the closest thing to your target respondent so far. The craziest thing I ever witnessed with my own eyes was a guy who somehow managed to lose control at less than 15 miles per hour, jumped the curb and smashed into the guardrail. Needless to say, he wasn't issued a license. But the best story I ever had from a coworker happened immediately after she came inside, swearing a blue streak because during a part of the test where the examiner stands on the curb in order to observe maneuvers, her customer drove over the curb and straight into her knee. I was in the back seat of the car when it happened. I'd just taken my third and final driving test, passed it without a hitch, no problemo. However, the driving route was just going to another kid's house to pick her up. Pretty standard, right? So, as I pull up to the driveway, the driving instructor says, "Just be ready, she's never even sat in a driver's seat of a car before." I didn't think too much of it because my first time driving was with the instructor, and that had gone well. Anyway, we get in and start driving off. Not even 45 seconds later, we get to a stop sign. She doesn't stop, so the instructor slams on his brake in his footwell. She was confused as to why she was stopping, so she continued to press down on the accelerator harder, like to the floor. Lots of screaming telling her to stop. After about 15 seconds of that, she puts the car in park and blows the transmission. It was some 1980s Volvo and the car was pretty much junked. It's funny, as we were driving, my instructor was telling me how he was surprised this car was still going. It had about 295,000 miles on it. At the DMV renewing my license, listened to the tester tell parents why she failed. Not only was she immediately speeding once we left the lot, she was also speeding through a school zone. I am a driver's license tester, it's just one of the many roles at my job. We test on a course, so there isn't really that much room for insane mess-ups. I go over everything before the exam just to refresh their memory because of nerves. I walk through the whole test, and the second we go out the door, it all disappears to them. I had one kid back into a car when we were leaving the spot to start the test. Didn't understand why he'd failed because the car wasn't on the course. Our parking section has cones to simulate cars. I've had kids plow over the cones, run them over, back over them, and continue on thinking they're doing well. The only people I've had to drive on the wrong side of the road are people from different countries who are used to driving on that side and then realize it a few seconds later with an "oh crap" look. So nothing too insane. I heard this story from my driving instructor in high school. He was giving a kid a lesson and they were on the highway. He asked the student to pass a car that was driving a little slow. The student signals, merges into the left lane and gently accelerates. Everything's going well when suddenly the student exclaims, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to shift the gear into pass." The instructor is momentarily confused until it's too late as the student reaches for the automatic gear shifter and throws it towards P while traveling at 65 miles per hour. This wasn't good for the car. The first time I took the driving test, having never parallel parked before because I lived in the suburbs, I tried it and was like 3 foot from the curb. Second time, I backed into the space perfectly. The instructor says, "Okay, just pull forward a foot and you're good." Excited that I did it, I never put it in drive and reversed over the cones. The third time, it was pouring rain. I drove the exact speed limit. Afterward, he told me I was driving too fast in the rain, but passed me anyway. I am utterly convinced the third time is the "screw it, you pass" charm, because the first time I was failed for tapping the curve while backing into a spot. Now I never even go back into spots. The second time for admittedly being a moron and leaving the DMV for an entrance-only part. And the third time I had parallel parked very shoddily, but he was just like, "Get out of here, go drive on your own and leave me out of it." Several in one day, actually. I wasn't the tester, but I was waiting in line to get my test with about 30 other people. Number 1, the car they were using didn't have valid registration or inspection. Automatic fail. Second, the car had no brake lights. Automatic fail. Third, the insurance was expired in the car. Fourth, they put it in reverse instead of drive. Nearly backed into the car behind them, but didn't. Automatic fail. Fifth, they ran over the parallel parking cone completely. Automatic fail. Sixth, they hit the curb turning left out of the lot somehow. Automatic fail. These were 6 different people who went before me. It was beyond frustrating. I waited over an hour for 6 out of the 10 people in front of me to not even make it out of the parking lot. Not an instructor, but in high school, the instructor had me drive around doing his chores. I had to drive to Blockbuster so he could drop off his videos, to Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru, and to check out a house he was eyeing up to buy. He sounds like my dad when I needed driving lessons. My cousin went to get their license. They pulled out from the parking lot of the DMV, took both hands off the wheel to put down the visor to block the sun, and failed instantly. What's your worst story from the "throw him in the pool, he'll learn how to swim" parenting style? I had never gone camping before I was 11. I really wanted to go with my 10-year-old cousin. My parents took me to the woods and handed us the tent and a half-full bag of ranch Doritos and like a pack of bratwurst and my 7-year-old sister. Then they pulled off, leaving us to camp for the first time alone in the woods with a 7-year-old. It was not a fun weekend. I never went camping again, but it was apparently fine because that's how my dad and uncle learned. I'm just grateful for the lack of serial killers and black bears. My dad was notorious for the rub dirt on it method when I got hurt as a kid. When I was 9, I was in a nasty motorcycle accident out in the desert. I broke and misplaced my fibula. The bone was protruding from my leg. My dad didn't want to end his desert trip early, so he told me not to look at it and keep trying to walk. I was in so much pain anytime I'd move, I'd black out. My brother was so concerned he urged my dad that we should go home. My dad finally gave in but was so drunk he let my 11-year-old brother at the time drive us out of the desert. He was so nervous he hit so many bumps, and each bump I'd black out and then come to again. Once we got home, Dad thought it would be best to sleep it off before going to the hospital. The next day, I was admitted to the hospital and my dad was taken into custody by CPS. My dad, when he decided to give me driving lessons when I was a teenager, which turned out to be a driving lesson, singular. He took me to the parking lot across the street from our house and had me tool around to get used to the steering and pedals for about 15 minutes. Then, annoyed that I wasn't catching on fast enough for his taste, he decided we should go on the actual road and I'd learn faster in a more challenging environment. Cue him barking orders to speed up, slow down, hit the brakes, in an increasingly frustrated voice as I tooled along, terrified that I was going to hit someone. The culmination of our lesson came when he noticed we were low on gas and told me to pull into the gas station. Keep in mind, my sum total of driving experience at this point was about 25 minutes, which did not include parallel parking. I pulled into the gas station and came at the pump at something like a 30-degree angle. He grabbed the steering wheel to correct and actually yelled at me, "Jesus Christ, don't you know how to drive?" To which I said, "No, I don't. You're teaching me, remember?" He drove back home silently. That was the end of Dad's driving lessons. I signed up with a driving school after that. The narrator has done videos on helicopter parents before, and honestly, I don't know which of these sets is worse. At least the helicopters can occasionally make the excuse of caring too much. Lots of these ones just come across as not wanting to parent. I should also warn you all that some of the following stories get pretty dark. Doing trauma surgery. A mum decided she needed a nap and told her 15-year-old daughter to drive. Mum survived, the daughter didn't. First and most painful organ harvest I ever did. Cliff jumping. 20 foot up, a girl's dad pushed her, but she hesitated and tried to stay up there but slipped. Landed on her back on a boulder from 15 feet and then the water. "You probably just killed her," I said, jumping in to do a rescue. Luckily, our lifeguard group was there doing practice rescues and even had the board. How she survived with just bruises is a miracle. Search and rescue pulled her out the rest of the way. Not my story, but my mum's. She developed a phobia after she was thrown into the pool as a kid to learn how to swim. At the age of 70, she still doesn't know how to. She's terrified of being on the water, even in a safety vest. Then some fake clairvoyant told her she'd die by drowning. So we spend our summers in the mountains as far away from water as possible. I was scared of the deep end, so my dad threw me in. My cousin parked an inflatable mattress in the corner I was in immediately. My parents supposedly yelled at him to move, but he didn't. I don't know how long I was under the mattress for, but I was spitting up water and choking when I came back up. I was maybe 6 at the time. I got stung by a bee and my mother was convinced I was faking. At the point I started to struggle to breathe, she finally irritatingly relented and made me walk to the hospital using my baby brother's stroller the entire way. When I got there, the staff were horrified, sometimes mortified apparently. They rushed me in to give me an epinephrine shot, and luckily that did the trick. Many months later, a bee got into my bedroom and my father called me a wimp for coming and getting him to deal with it instead of dealing with it myself. You have to learn to deal with these things sometime. Or like, I could just ask someone not allergic to bees to come and safely deal with the bee instead of risking hospitalization. And yes, I agree that my parents were terrible and negligent for more than just this one single incident. I've been no contact for about 20 years because of the way they treated me as a child. I have countless incidents like this from both of them. This one just stood out at the time I was replying. My younger cousin, who was 4, was a climber and always needed help getting down. His dad told his mum to leave him. He'll either learn how to get down himself or he'll stop climbing. My cousin ended up climbing onto a roof, falling off and getting impaled on a fence pole. One very expensive trip to ER and he now has a cool scar on his thigh. I hurt my arm playing football during break at school. I was sent home by the school nurse. My dad said it was fine, bandaged it and sent me to school the next day, only for them to send me home again within an hour. My mum made my dad take me to hospital and my arm was broken. My wrist had split lengthways and was in casts for 9 months. I was secretly buzzing, to be honest, because, well, that showed him, the idiot. My father-in-law decided that when his first child was born that he and his wife would not go to the baby when it started crying in the middle of the night in order to teach him that crying doesn't get you anything in this world. Turns out, newborns need to be fed every 2 hours, so it's a good thing my mother-in-law ignored him and went to their newborn son, otherwise he might have died. My parents gave me this advice and I shut that right down. They also wanted me to set the baby down and leave her to cry. She's undersized and gets pretty cold pretty quickly. And then they asked me when I'll let her stay with them overnight. Like, you aren't getting her at all with your outdated advice. Ignore them, she meant bullies. And don't show a reaction. When they're bored, they'll stop. This was completely false. And you wonder why I hate going to school so much, mother. It's not a wonder that when I went to secondary school, I made a motto of, don't stand for anyone's bullcrap. I went through too much of that crap for anyone else to do the same. Ironically enough, there are studies that state that the trauma of childhood bullying goes for the rest of one's life, so I'm pretty much set. When I got my very first period, then my family made a trip to the pool the next day. My mum shrugged it off and told me, "You don't bleed when you're swimming," and never said another word about it. I spent the entire time taking trips to the bathroom. I was volunteering at a parent-child zoo day and saw a few parents like this. The zoo had some free-roaming peacocks, and it was awful how many parents didn't tell their too-young-to-know kids that those things can be mean. So the little toddler goes, "Wow, pretty bird," and tries to get a closer look, only to get chased and attacked by this thing while the parents watch. Most of them said something like, "You should have known better." Like, how if you never teach them? The child can barely walk. You expect them to remember that some animals have a strong territorial sense? And then your baby gets terrorized by this thing that's bigger than them and looks alien for all they know, and you don't even give them a hug. See also that one mum that we had to kick out of the zoo because she was encouraging her kids to antagonize the llama in the hopes that it would spit on them. Yikes, people. Have some empathy for tiny humans who trust you implicitly with their well-being. When I was about 5 or 6, I was very sick with a flu. Fever, vomiting, sweating, congestion. It was awful. There was some mix-up at the pharmacy and they thought I was my father and gave him adult medication, basically these giant horse pills. Now, normal child medications for things like this are syrups and chewable stuff for obvious reasons. My dad came home and told me I had to take these meds. I had a hard time getting them down, almost choking a few times. He got frustrated and literally started shoving these huge pills down my sore throat with his angrily shaking fingers. I started crying. My nose was stuffed so I could only breathe through my mouth. I remember his wedding ring banging against my teeth, my eyes watering, gasping for air while looking at my mum for help. Eventually, I coughed it back up, crying and my throat on fire. I remember my mum demanding an apology from my dad who just said, "Well, he's gonna have to learn to take pills like that sometime anyway," and he stormed off. Damn, I haven't thought about that story in like 20 years. Well, honestly, I wonder how you haven't thought about it because that's some childhood trauma stuff right there. If you're ever wondering whether you're doing the right thing for your kid, and part of your current situation involves you literally ramming a prescription that isn't for them into their throat, the answer is probably not. This is awful. My stepmom walked me, my sister and my brother, all between 10 and 12, deep into the woods and left us there to learn survival skills. We all thought we were out on a hike when she distracted us and ran away. We wandered into camp hours later. We knew how to get back, but searched for hours worried something had happened to her. She was drinking margaritas and smirking. My dad and I once witnessed someone who literally did this to a little 3-year-old girl. The little girl was just playing at the edge of the pool, happily minding her own business, when Dad ran up behind her, picked her up and tossed her screaming as far as he could into the deep end of the pool whilst yelling, "Time to swim, honey." At first, my dad and I didn't react because my dad has done this to me as a game. I learned to swim first. But then we started to notice she was struggling to surface while her dad just watched. My dad nervously asked, can she swim? To which the guy just shrugged and said, "She'll figure it out." I've never seen my dad book it so fast to get to the water as I did that day. He quickly got the kid out of the water and started screaming at the guy about what kind of idiot he was, while the girl was just bawling her eyes out. I swear my dad was ready to deck the guy. This was back in the 1990s, so we didn't have a cell phone to call the police with, and we never saw them again after that. It was the first time in my life I'd seen insane parenting, and to this day it freaks me out that some people will still do this. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. 2 days after I graduated high school, I came to an empty house. All of my stuff was in a U-Haul because my mum and stepdad moved without me. I've been financially independent ever since, but a heads up would have been real nice, guys. My real dad wasn't involved in this situation. He was on the other side of the country. I'm still close with him, but he's very low income, so he couldn't help me that time. I went no contact with my mum for about a year, but she weaseled her way back in. I think I see her in person every 2 years, and I don't acknowledge my stepfather exists. I've been considering going no contact with my mum again recently. I actually used to be a swim teacher in college teaching private lessons in people's backyards because of parents who'd thrown their kids into the pool to sink or swim. It was usually mums calling me for help because they heard from a friend of a friend that I was able to teach their kid and get them to like the water again in about a month or less. There was this one 7-year-old kid. I had to sit with him on the pool deck the whole first lesson and bring buckets of water to him because his dad had dunked him multiple times and insisted that his son would just figure it out eventually because that's how he learned. Needless to say, he was never home when I was there. The mum had me come while Dad was at work. 4 weeks later, she had me come later in the afternoon, so he'd come home towards the end of our lesson. His dad saw his son swimming and cried happy tears. He had no idea I'd been there 3 days a week for a month. My favorite student was a 70-year-old man who wanted to do a triathlon, but never learned to swim because his dad threw him as a child. It took about 3 months total, a lot of hand-holding on the steps and shallow end, but he finally achieved his goal and I got to cheer him on at the finish line. I still remember how each of my students clung to my arms and clawed at my neck in their first lessons. I never dunked or forced anyone out of their comfort zone. My lessons had to be customized for each student to keep it fun and relaxing. The trauma in their eyes was the haunting part. It stayed with me and I never force anything on my kids that they aren't ready to do. It's about trust, not force. I am learning from these stories that some parents would rather not have a kid than a kid who has to learn things. My parents told me they were kicking me out at 18 in a move to motivate me. I was in college, no job and virtually no money. My grandfather had left me about 10K in savings bonds that I asked for, but they wouldn't give me either. So I made a plan. I went to about 5 different targets and shoplifted about 4 or 5 video games that I took to GameStop to sell. Stupid and wrong, I know. And at the end of the day, I had about $600. I was planning on buying some green herb to sell to get some income going till I got on my feet. But when I got back to my house, a cop was waiting for me. My parents ended up cashing in my 10K to pay for the lawyer. I was always a picky eater growing up. One time, my mum sat me down with a small bowl of almonds and told me I couldn't get out of my seat until I finished it. I insisted that I hated them and they were making my mouth itch. She thought I was just being difficult. I started to swallow the almonds like pills because my mouth was so itchy from chewing them. A couple of years later, I saw an allergist and discovered that I was in fact allergic to tree nuts. My mum's whole parenting style was sink or swim, but funnily enough, she did literally toss me into the pool as well. The summer between 1st and 2nd grade, my family moved somewhere with a pool. My mum was adamant that I had to learn to swim as a baby, so she bought floaties for my younger sister and refused to buy any for me because I already knew how to swim and you're too big for floaties. When I refused to get into any part of the pool I couldn't walk in, my mum called to me from outside the pool and promptly grabbed me and tossed me into the 6-foot end. And surprise, I didn't know how to swim. I remember splashing twice, hearing my mum yell at me to stop panicking, and then I went under and tried swimming to the surface like I'd seen in movies, and eventually got my head a bit above water, coughed out a bunch of water and started screaming for help before I went under again. My mum told me to stop making a scene and swim towards the edge. I made it to the edge and couldn't pull myself out of the pool, so she yelled at me to swim to the shallow end. When I tried to grab onto the edge to just pull myself to the shallow end, she kept taking my fingers off the edge and yelling at me to stop playing and just swim. When I finally got to the shallow part, my mum and family just went, "See, you still remember how to swim? You never forget." They threw me in the pool, I drowned, and needed CPR. They let me use my floaties after that. "Stop crying or I'll give you a reason to cry," is something my dad used to say to me. It would send me into a panic. I was upset and didn't know how to stop crying, and then hearing that would make it worse because now I'm crying because my dad was mad at me, and if I didn't stop crying, he was going to make me cry even more. My dad actually did throw me in the pool to see if I could swim. They didn't want to teach me to tie my shoes because my mom said, "I had to learn that myself, so should you." My in-laws were like this with their kids. So when my husband and I started dating, I got to teach him how to eat without grasping his silverware like a toddler, showed him an easier way to tie his shoes, taught him better hygiene, stuff like that. He was able to do everything on his own, but it was very clear that he'd had to figure it out on his own and no one had bothered to teach him or help him at any point. Just in case anyone wanted an example of how adults who are metaphorically thrown in the pool actually end up further down the line. Also, I used the term throw in the pool to describe those who think kids can magically self-teach themselves everything, but my god, there are so many who do it literally. That ain't right. At age 4, my father decided that my sister and I should learn to tie our shoes. He made us stand there for hours, trying to do it, crying. We just weren't quite old enough. Every time I asked my parents to explain anything as a kid, I was told either, "You're smart, you'll figure it out," or "You just don't want to do it." Any attempt at maturity was met with either flat-out laughter or being told that I was too young to worry about it. Cue me turning 18 and suddenly I'm expected to be an adult, get a job, pay taxes and all that jazz. I asked where in the heck do I start and they got angry because apparently I hadn't figured anything out. Wonder why, guys? I was at the beach one time and it was hot out. I couldn't walk on the sand without sandals on. I heard a cry and looked up to see a little girl standing barefoot on the sand, not more than 2, screaming for her dad, who was 5 feet away, who just told her to stop being such a little wimp. I just about had a rage stroke and ran over to pick her up myself, but he eventually did. When I was 11 or 12, 2 kids from the neighborhood got into a street fight. Kid 1 clearly got the best of Kid 2, and 2 was crying and went home. That should have been the end of the story. Kid 2's parents met him at his front door and sent him back out there to continue the fight. I'm not sure if it was about honor or what, but it was painful to watch. My mum forced me to drink milk. She just thought I hated healthy stuff and only preferred junk food. The thing is, I always loved veggies, but I also like junk food. Basically, I like any food except milk. I just couldn't consume milk. It would make me chuck up, and then I'd have sudden acid reflux, not being able to handle it. She thought I was acting to escape, but I just hated it. Turns out I was lactose intolerant, and my mum still thinks I'm making it up because she can't let go of her ego. "Oh, let him touch the fire. He won't do it again. 3rd degree burns for life. Thanks, Dad." 7 years old. Had an asthma attack at our camp in the middle of the night. At the time, treatment for an attack was a nebulizer machine that required electricity, which we didn't have at our camp. My parents kept telling me that I just had to calm down and breathe better so the attack would go away on its own. They only intervened hours later because they couldn't sleep because of all the noise I was making as I choked and gasped for air. We drove 3 hours back to our house, passing multiple hospitals along the way, because they were embarrassed that I was in such bad shape and blamed me for just not breathing properly. Fun times! I still have asthma, but it's been well managed for years now. I take Zenhale every day and Ventolin as needed. I've been in no contact with my mother for over a decade. I'm still in contact with my father. They divorced in my early 20s. We aren't close, but I still find enough value in the relationship to keep talking to him. He isn't actively cruel like my mother was, just lost in his own world, I guess you could say. I feel sorry for him that he hasn't managed to overcome his own demons the way that I have. Overall, I'm happy and healthy now. I have a lovely husband and we've created a good life for ourselves. I do have CPTSD from the years of mistreatment I've lived through, but therapy and proper medication have helped tremendously. The actual pool thing. I was a lifeguard as a high schooler. Some parents did this to their 5-year-old. The parent thought the kid was fine because he wasn't splashing around. He was bobbing up and down with his arms going straight up and straight out. That actually means they're drowning. I had to jump in and grab the kid, who had swallowed significant amounts of water, then call an ambulance to check the kid out. Parents didn't want us to call the ambulance, but we told him it was the ambulance or the police, because what he did could be considered child endangerment. Dad was losing his crap, screaming at me, a 17-year-old girl. The owner of the pool saw this, and he, a former Navy dude, got up in the dad's face. The parent was banned from the pool for life. To this day, I'm convinced the guy was completely hammered. What drama did you uncover when you hired a private investigator? My mother's dad walked out on my mum, my aunt, and my grandmother when my mum was just 5. A few years later, my grandmother died of a grand mal seizure. Mum was taken in by her grandparents, but she always wondered why her dad left and what became of him. In her 40s, she saved up a bit and hired a PI to track him down. Turns out he moved over time from Pittsburgh to California, where he wound up in prison for armed robbery and some other violent crimes. He died in San Quentin Penitentiary. I think Mum got a lot of closure for that. She was able to see that life would have most likely been even worse if he had stayed. At least living with her grandparents, she was loved and raised to fulfill her potential. My grandmother's first boyfriend after my grandfather died said he was a retired cop and a veteran. They enjoyed dancing to country music together and bought a new car in her name though, even though she can't drive anymore. My uncles hired a PI. Turns out that old jerk had a habit of shacking up with widows and bleeding them dry. The boyfriend, not the PI. My sister, who's in her mid-30s now, is adopted and hired a PI to find her estranged biological father. They came back saying that not only was he still alive and nearby, but he had a daughter, meaning she had a biological sibling. Further digging from the PI uncovered that they weren't just similar ages either, they were exactly the same age. The evidence suggested that my sister had a twin and her birth father had taken the twin and vanished. Huge, life-changing news. Eventually, through more incredible detective work, the PI realized that the daughter was actually just my sister. There was no other sibling, and they'd just been investigating my sister the whole time accidentally. Needless to say, we asked for the money back. In short, sister hired a PI accidentally investigated her. I was a private investigator for a bit. Most work PIs do is searching financial or court records and serving documents. But one time I was paid by wealthy parents to stake out their college senior who'd stopped returning their calls. They were worried about her. Those parents paid like 40 grand for round-the-clock monitoring just to find out their daughter dropped out of school and was a full-time ski bum. By the way, stakeouts are mostly just sitting in your car reading all day. My parents hired a private investigator to find out who my online boyfriend was when I was 13. The PI came back and told them he was just a fat 13-year-old. Huh. You know, as much as I think parents shouldn't meddle too much in their kids' social lives and relationships past a certain limit, I do think some concern from them was warranted. They could rest easy knowing that this wasn't a 56-year-old weirdo. When I met my wife, she seemed to have a normal, modern family. 2 mums, 2 dads. Over time, it became apparent that her stepdad wasn't around so much. Holidays, birthdays, you name it. He'd pop in to say hi, grab a nap, whatever, and take off again. My wife's family thought this was normal, just the way it had always been since they were teenagers. He claimed to have a job following FedEx trucks around the state to prevent theft and substance trafficking. But I thought it was strange and started making jokes about him having another family. Well, I guess it got my sister-in-law thinking because she got a favor from the PI at her law firm. Sure enough, he had not 2 but 3 wives around the state and 5 other stepchildren between them. My sister-in-law breaks the news to her mother, who immediately changes the locks and files for divorce. They never speak again. Cold turkey. The divorce was even uncontested. As an FU, they also sent the report to his other wives. To answer some of the questions I'm getting, yes, polygamy is illegal, but I don't think it's really worth prosecuting except to make an example of people. I don't know if my mother-in-law was his first wife or not. I do know that one of the wives had been married and divorced him between their marriage. How does it happen? Counties don't exactly share marriage certificates. His families were pretty far from each other. Was their wedding legal? No idea, I'm not a lawyer. Probably the separation was just a formality for paperwork purposes, which is why it went to court, why it went uncontested, and why he never showed up again. I think he reached out about it once or twice, but she never answered the phone. And if he ever showed up again, we weren't told about it. My mother-in-law is a strong, independent woman of faith who just didn't know. He fooled his stepdaughters for 15 years as well. My grandfather hired one. He was separated from his brother when the Japanese occupied China. My grandfather safely made it to Hong Kong and eventually to Canada. His brother made it to Singapore or Malaysia, according to his family friends back then. So my grandfather spent a good 5 years or so working with a PI to find his brother so they could be reunited. Sadly, with just a picture and the fact that many people died in the war, it wasn't much to go on. My grandfather is still alive and always thinks of his brother. It's his wish to see him one more time. And to let you know, he worked with the PI many years ago, say between 1999 and 2004, and maybe a few touch points here and there over the years. Grandfather was disheartened because he made so many trips to Asia over the years thinking, this is it, but it just cost more money and got his hopes up. No clue if the brother married, if he even made it to Singapore or Malaysia, and those are just the two most likely countries. He could have ended up literally anywhere. Not sure if he's even still alive. He'd be in his late 80s now, estimated, and Granddad hasn't spoken about it directly with me, just my mum, who's his daughter. If I'm being honest, we haven't exactly encouraged him to continue to search either. All of my aunts and uncles tell him to move on and enjoy his time in peace rather than in constant yearning. I don't have the status in the family to overstep my mum and her siblings and start bringing up the past or asking him to consider a DNA kit. If I do, I'd have to do it in secret and consider the emotional investment my grandfather may make. He's not living unhappily by any means. He has a great life and is quite accomplished with raising 6 kids to have families and homes of their own. We each take care of him. He has tons of friends, likes to cook, uses WeChat to talk to anyone and everyone, travel and read. He does want to see his brother, but as time goes by, the memory and drive becomes more faint, and eventually the day-to-day life just makes it easier for him to accept the circumstances. I hadn't heard from my mum since I was about 15, very unstable due to substances and alcohol, stuff like that. When I was 29, I decided it was time to find out what happened to her. I figured if she was a Jane Doe somewhere, then I could put her to rest, and if she was alive, then I wanted to let her know that I forgave her. Hired a PI to help. I guess she was moved by my story, and she also ran info for the man my mother was apparently married to, on the house. And with one clue from his report, I was able to track them down. They were alive and just starting out on recovery after being homeless and addicted for many years. I wouldn't have found my mum if it wasn't for the PI who kindly ran an extra report for free. Mum has remained sober now for about 7 years and is probably the healthiest she's ever been, physically and emotionally. My story's a little different. I had a PI investigate me. About 6 years ago, I became very ill with a variety of issues that left me quite poorly. I was an optician, and so using my hands with arthritis was just never going to be a plan. So I applied for a UK disability support. I sailed through and started receiving a monthly amount. Now, fast forward a few years, I then started getting restless at home, so I retrained into a job that didn't involve my hands. I stopped receiving the money, except for the benefit you get while you work. I used it for paying a better automatic car off. Well, my very nasty mother's friend saw me start work and called the benefits office, assuming I was still claiming. Unfortunately, she exaggerated and told them I was living a normal life and even running daily. So the benefits office filmed and watched me. They thought they had a aha, gotcha moment. Their PI provided photos of me walking unaided. When I sat in the meeting with a lot of smug fraud officers and my solicitor, I felt sick to my stomach. I really couldn't work out what the frick was going on. They were trying to make it look like I'd been running and jogging, but I knew I would never walked any further than 5 meters to my car. Anyway, my solicitor pointed out the photos were screenshots of a video. Asked for the video. Videos were of me struggling to walk. In one of them, I rested on my car before opening my door. In another, I was going to the supermarket and had replaced my cane with a trolley to lean on it. You get the picture. So the fraud team basically said, "Oops," and I never heard from them again. I spend a lot of my time trying to appear normal, and it bit me in the butt. Never trust these fraud TV shows now, either. And for those asking, I no longer speak to my mother, so I'm not sure if she's still friends with that lady. That lady did it because, quite honestly, I think she's brainwashed into thinking that anyone who claims benefits must be scummy. And I'm doing well today, thank you for asking. I started methotrexate last year, and it seems to be holding me quite steady. How unbelievably scummy to try and tamper with evidence to try and make it give off impressions that were just blatantly false. You'd think maybe the best PIs would be paid to find any results, not just to fabricate them themselves. And yeah, your mum's friend is a C-word. I know somebody who was like an assistant to the actual PI. She basically went to bingo with a camera in her purse to capture video of a woman. The woman claimed that a car accident had completely immobilized her, but she'd take off the neck brace all the time, playing bingo hours on end. Nothing exciting, just capturing fraud. Wait, she took off the brace to play bingo? Yeah man, you've never played hardcore bingo before? I had a girlfriend that worked for a PI for a while. She said that the majority of their work was insurance scams. She took a lot of pictures of guys who said they were hurt on the job, playing golf and surfing and such. There seems to be a lot of that here. Sometimes I wonder if I'd be able to pull off such a scam, because any investigator would only be able to determine that after the accident I didn't post my life on social media, and I almost never engaged in strenuous activity outside the house, so no change there then. In his 20s, my significant other hired a PI to find out what had actually become of the childhood bully who had made his life hell and who had vowed to kill him. Actually, he did try to bring a loaded weapon to school, but some other kid ratted him out, and the bully got expelled, but still lived in the neighborhood for a few more years and beat up my significant other every chance he got. The PI found the bully living in a town more than an hour outside of the big city, in a dead-end job. He'd been arrested for assault and public drunkenness a couple of times. That info helped my significant other get past his fear that the guy would find him someday and make good on his threat. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Had a babysitter that we thought was stealing with us. Luckily our neighbor was a PI couple and they ran a background check for $10. The babysitter had a string of DUIs, and a few days before a large fine was due, my camera disappeared. He also stole money from my kids' piggy banks. He sort of disappeared, but was also really into Instagram, so I surreptitiously followed him. He started babysitting again for a single mum, an easy target I guess, and posted a lot of fun pics with this family. I tracked down the mum and sent her a long email detailing out his whole scam. She said we were right and it was clear he'd been stealing from her business. He's since gone underground, but I still Google him regularly to see what he's up to. He's been able to avoid arrests for a while now. I used to work for an insurance defense firm years ago. Best PI story I have is where we hired one to tail a guy who was suing our client for an injury that wasn't entirely our client's fault. The guy was refusing to settle and was insisting on going to trial even though he offered a fair sum that would have paid his medical bills. The PI we hired got some good pics that showed the plaintiff was nowhere near as injured as he claimed. But the crown jewel of the photos was one where the guy was walking on a pier with a woman who wasn't his wife. He had his hand on her butt and everything. Later in a deposition, the attorney slid the picture to the plaintiff and said something like, "Mr. Smith, who's the woman in this picture? We'd like to schedule a deposition with her as well." The guy went ghost white and told his attorney he wanted to settle. At least he was smart enough to realize that if his wife found out the other woman was going to be deposed, he was going to have to get a family law attorney as well, because the divorce papers would soon follow. And to clarify some points here, no, this is not technically blackmail. Our firm had the PI follow him to see if he was faking his injuries, which is standard operating procedure, not to see if he was cheating on his wife. We had no idea he was doing that. The fact the woman in the picture was his mistress was irrelevant. The attorney could have asked for the person's contact info even if she was just a friend, co-worker, cousin, whatever. The attorney wanted to depose her to ascertain the extent of the guy's injuries. At no point did the attorney say, "Drop the suit or we'll put your affair out to your wife." Even in 2020, I struggle to picture a private investigator as anything other than a man in a beige trench coat and a trilby. I used to work in the office of a PI firm that specialized in insurance fraud. I'd edit and sometimes write surveillance and background investigation reports that were passed along to our clients, mostly lawyers and insurance companies. One thing that never failed to surprise me was an astounding number of people who claimed to suffer devastating disabilities regularly posting pictures or videos of themselves running marathons and building decks in their yards. I'm comfortable saying that at least in half a dozen of the cases I handled over 2 years, our clients flagged their claimants as fraudulent because of social media. Disgruntled exes are another significant source of tips, by the way. To give an example of one of the more remarkable insurances in which social media saved a case, it's summer, and on the day of surveillance, our investigator sees the claimant and his family loading their car with beach stuff. The claimant drives for a couple of hours before the investigator eventually loses sight of the vehicle. Side note, tailing someone in a vehicle without 1. Arousing suspicion, or 2. Losing the vehicle is hard. The investigator, being way too far from his own home to drive home, checked into a motel. The next morning, he checked his phone and found the claimant checked in at a water park on Facebook. The investigator makes a pit stop to buy some swim trunks and a beach towel, drove to the water park and got hours of covert footage of the claimant swimming in a wave pool, going down water slides, picking up and putting down his kids, and generally doing a whole lot of things you probably shouldn't be able to do with a serious spinal injury. In short, if you're going to commit insurance fraud, stay the heck off social media. People are so dumb. I'm paranoid that if I even do anything like play a video game on my sick days in bed, that I'm going to be in a meeting with my boss the next day about it. I can't imagine just blatantly showing off your delinquency this much. My mum's best friend. She divorced her husband and was awarded full custody of their daughter. His family was a crap show. He kidnapped his daughter, and he and his parents just disappeared. This was easier in 1977 than it is now. She tried hiring a PI but couldn't afford one, so she started learning how to trace people on her own, in the days before the internet. She spent years doing this whenever she wasn't waitressing. She did find her daughter in 81, but by this time her daughter was poisoned against her. Mum's friend went on to get her PI license and was a PI specializing in women's issues for the next 2 decades. I don't know what happened to her after that. If she's still alive, she'd be in her 80s, I think. One of my jobs is to search for long-lost relatives, usually several generations ago. Typically, the case is about old plots of land where I should track down their owners or their heirs to update the land registry because a state wants to build something there. Let me tell you, the amount of information you can find on Google and in public records is astounding if you know where to look. I know someone that hired a pet detective to find their cat, and he frickin' found him. My little brother hired one to find his dog. He was living in LA, and his complex let the dog out by accident. Small dog, some mutt of toy breeds. He searched by himself for 2 weeks, and he was devastated. My folks found this guy in Indiana, who was like $3,000 to hire, but he guaranteed that he'd find the dog or he wouldn't get paid. My folks and I chipped in as well as my brother couldn't afford that. The guy found my brother's dog inside a day. That was wild. On the other end of the PI spectrum, I was in a bad car accident 13 years ago. I was rear-ended at a red light by a lady going 45. Most of my injuries were soft tissue damage minus the TMJ. That essentially means that up to the present day, every morning my hands go numb, it takes 3 days to clean one room, and I can't braid my hair. Various other numerous tasks that take me way longer than any other normal 41-year-old. Sometimes you have to do things because you still want to feel normal, not like you're a 90-year-old woman. So fast forward 8 years, finally had my day in court to see if I'd get my $90K in damages. They show camera footage from 4 years prior covering 3 whopping days of me pushing a grocery cart, carrying groceries, and talking on the phone. Apparently that's enough to determine that you're fine. My good friend was only raised by her mum growing up, who'd always tell her that her father had walked out on them when she was a baby and that he'd never wanted anything to do with her. My friend took it really hard and struggled through her entire childhood believing that. But then a couple of years ago, she hired a PI to see if they could find him again. Well, they did, and it turns out what her mother told them was a lie. Her dad is seriously one of the sweetest and soft-hearted guys I've ever met. He left because my friend's mum forced him out when he uncovered her infidelity. I guess he wasn't actually her dad because her mum cheated on him while they were together, but he loved her like she was his own and only avoided contacting her because her mum convinced him he legally has no rights to her child. And even worse, she threatened to accuse him of mistreating her and her daughter if he reached out in any way. Thankfully, my friend is an adult now and she's moved out of her mum's house and she can have the relationship with her dad that she always wanted. It just sucks she had to go through the effort of hiring a PI to achieve that. My dad hired a PI in the mid-90s in Eastern Europe to find out if one of his business partners was stealing from him. Instead, he found out his own brother was stealing from him. He refused to believe the PI and his brother robbed him blind. Took a huge amount of money and left him with gigantic debt. He still forgave his brother. My work requires us to hire PIs to investigate injury claims. We had this high schooler claiming a head injury so severe that he couldn't live a normal life. Specifically, he had an issue with bright lights. Couldn't stare at a computer or TV too long, and our PI caught him on several occasions at the movies, arcade, basketball games, so basically he was making a fraudulent claim. Not mine specifically, but my mother hired one to spy on the school. See, my little brother is dyslexic and has severe social anxiety and was struggling a lot in the public school setting. He had an IEP, which the teachers and principal were insisting was being followed. But every day my brother would come home in tears shaking because he felt abandoned and stupid. So Mum hired the investigator and sure enough, the teachers were basically just ignoring my brother. They'd sit in the back of the room and demand he do his work and then wouldn't help him through it. Then they'd yell at him because he didn't do it. Again, he couldn't write because of the dyslexia. With all the evidence, my mum was able to arrange a meeting with the school board and threatened to sue. They agreed to pay his tuition for a private school that was supposed to help. It didn't help, and Mum just ended up pulling him out and homeschooling him. He's been doing a lot better. So homeschooling can be the right choice if it's made in the interest of actually getting your kid the right sort of education for their needs, and not just to hide them away from members of the opposite gender or to religiously brainwash them. Lesson learned. My dad hired one. You see, my mum got around a bit. I could have told him myself, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings, and he wanted hard evidence anyway. If I remember right, it was 5 different guys at one time. One might have been the crystal dealer, but he might have come later. It had been a while and there was a lot to keep up with. The PI was like, "I'm sorry, you really got your money's worth with what I found." I had my dad's back twice by telling the guys that she was married and that we all still lived together. Pretty entertaining breakups were my immediate reward, and not having to go with her to watch her date guys behind my dad's back was the long-term reward. Turns out, Dad doesn't have any bio children. I hired one because he was suspicious his stepdad was being unfaithful to his mum. So he asked me, and I put him in contact with the guy I knew. Bit of a backstory, the stepdad was 5'10", 160 pounds, and my friend is 6'2", 235 pounds and ripped. At 15, when my friend's mum and stepdad started dating, my friend gave the typical, "If you hurt her, you're dead" speech. Also, his bio dad walked out on him and his sister when my friend was like 4. It took a while, but my friend warmed up to the guy, and he's a good guy. Took my friend and I to a 49ers game once, which was pretty cool. Anyway, the PI said he wasn't cheating. Apparently there was a house on the market that my friend's mum wanted, and he bought it. He had been remodeling it for some time, and he kept it a secret. As a 5-year anniversary gift to her, he bought it. Anyway, they live in a 5-bedroom house now. What is the weirdest cause of death you've heard being diagnosed in a body? I'm in the medical field, so I've heard firsthand of some bizarre causes of death. One was a bee sting to the inside of a lung. The woman accidentally inhaled a bee and it stung her. Apparently, she was allergic. Took a week to figure it out. Another one was a bullet to the chest and ruled a homicide, except he had been shot 3 decades earlier. A small piece of shrapnel from the bullet wasn't removed when he was shot, but he was completely fine for 30 years. Then it found its way into his circulatory system, close to his heart, and made its way into the man's right ventricle and caused a heart attack. If I recall correctly, the man who'd shot him was sent to prison for a few years and released, but was subsequently arrested and charged with murder. Double jeopardy doesn't apply here, I'm assuming, because the person would have been charged with attempted murder or something when he shot the man, and the victim survived. But when he ended up dying, it changed the charge to murder. And the man with a very weird special interest who put a live eel up his butt, and it tore a hole through his large intestine. He died. Did an internship at the office of the chief medical examiner. A guy had decided to finish things in a river by wearing a backpack full of rocks. He was found soon and didn't have too much bloating or stuff due to the submersion. Upon examination, he had a lung infection where his right lung had disintegrated into green liquid. We removed about 1.5 liters of green fluid from his chest cavity. His left lung was fine. It was determined after looking at his medical records that he'd been to the doctor's office 5 times before he self-deleted and that this infection had been going on for almost a year until it got this bad. Numerous doctors had overlooked it. Accounts from those who knew him suspected that he had decided he didn't want to be alive anymore to stop the pain. My friend is an autopsy tech. Apparently it's not uncommon for cats or small dogs to eat the hands and faces off dead or incapacitated owners. His worst was an elderly woman who was paralyzed but not killed by a stroke, and her little dog ate all of her exposed skin before she was found. He did her autopsy after she died several hours after being admitted to hospital. Working in a nursing home and rehab, guy essentially died from pooping. He pushed too hard, blood pressure dropped, and that was it for him. You aren't going to die from pooping, viewer. There's a lot of ongoing discussion about why people with bad hearts, limited cardiac output, and damaged vocal cords die this way. Vasovagal syncope is totally boring from a medical perspective. I don't even treat it. If a normal person faints from pooping, their heart kicks back in like it should and they keep on living, so you aren't going to die. These medical videos are always the most uplifting to do. Now all of us can go out into that big scary world reassured that we probably aren't going to number 2 ourselves to death. I'm a criminal defense attorney. Had a client charged with murder for essentially getting into a shoving match with a guy. No external bruising or scratching, no evidence of trauma anywhere. They opened his head and found a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Turns out he had a ton of booze and smack in the toxin report. The substances had constricted the blood vessels and driven the blood pressure up, and the booze had thinned it all out. When he bumped his head, slumping back, that was all it took and he blew out and was dead in less than a minute. Really sad case. I was a security guard at a hospital in Alaska. One of my duties was to bring deceased people to the morgue, so I had a key to it. Got a radio call that some patient's wife wants her husband's wedding ring back. I assumed that it would be on a deceased person. I went to the morgue to look for it. I looked all over, there was no gold ring. I even opened the coolers. There were no bodies. I then looked in the fridge. Body parts and a little igloo cooler, so I look inside the cooler. It looks like very old banana peels. I glove up and pull some of them out. Turns out this guy had gotten his hand shredded in machinery. I had to get the mangled ring off his mangled hand, clean it off, and go give it to him. Okay, so not dead body, but similar levels of weird, especially when you're just a security guard. I'm a friend of a coroner's assistant. He spent a few months there. He said his craziest experience was when a man came in, apparently expired. He was a little vague about how the guy ended up on his table with the coroner, but I'll chalk it up to being early in his career. He starts to do a standard Y incision on the torso, and then stops early on. He noticed that the guy had slightly active vitals. He looked at the mortician present and says, "Oh, frick, this guy's alive." They determined the best way to resuscitate him was to do an adrenaline shot. Now, apparently he was declared dead but had something akin to pufferfish poisoning induced to his body. Anyway, he came to, screaming like a maniac and with his chest partially sliced open. He described the whole thing as surreal. My girlfriend was a mortician, specifically for cases of self-deletion. All such cases in the state got sent here. An elderly woman with schizophrenia came in after managing to swallow her severed right arm from the elbow down, and getting halfway through swallowing the other severed arm, again from the elbow down, before dying of blood loss. These injuries were self-inflicted and there were no power tools in the room. At the time of the examination, the first arm had already been partially digested. The arms were whole, they had large bruising and rough cuts, however, it was considered a self-deletion due to her mental state. It appeared she had managed to tear off or chewed through her arms, but she would have died of blood loss far before managing to jam them down her throat, so to this day I wonder how she did it. If I didn't see the look on my girlfriend's face the next day, I honestly wouldn't have believed it. I was a police officer and helped with a case where there was this guy in his 50s who died laying on his couch. He had told his friends he wasn't feeling well for a couple of days and figured it was from some cardiac-related event. Nope. Are you ready for an irrational fear? Guy had undiagnosed hemochromatosis, or high iron, that destroyed his liver, his ongoing cirrhosis, and the liver's inability to process blood as fast as it was being pumped caused varicose veins in the lining of his esophagus. This was a decades-long process. One day, one of the more esophageal varices ruptured, and the guy slowly bled to death through his digestive system while thinking he had a stomach bug or something, only to die taking a nap. Get regular physicals, folks. I'm an apprentice funeral director, but we had an autopsy tech come to my school once to do an autopsy demonstration. He was asked this very question, and this was his answer. Male, mid-50s, presented with jaundice and other signs of alcoholism, but supposedly no history of drinking. During preliminary observation, techs noted a red liquid coming from his butt. Assuming blood, it was tested. Came back as red wine and blood. Turned out the deceased was a closet alcoholic who had given himself enemas with whatever alcohol he had, in this case red wine. The doctors concluded he'd pierced part of his colon or rectum with whatever he'd enemaed himself with and led to a bleed. Working the ambulance for a barricaded male. After an hour of standby and trying not to fall asleep, a cop banged on our window frantically to call us into the house. A guy put his shotty in his mouth, but must have flinched at the last second and blew his face off. He was left with just a scream hole that was fluttering flaps of torn flesh, not unlike a predator mouth for a face. That was the only time I ever saw an ER nurse shriek at the sight of something. I worked briefly as a morgue assistant a few years back. The job mainly consisted of moving corpses and holding organs while the pathologist did his thing. By far the most what-the-frick-worthy death I've seen was a guy who'd been working in a factory, getting himself off by rubbing his eggplant on the underside of a high-speed conveyor belt that he was meant to be operating. He got caught and it tore off most of his crotch. Ruled as death by misadventure. He had bled out from a torn femoral artery before the paramedics even made it to the scene. And yes, I'm aware that there's a Darwin Award that's quite similar. That guy was in the US somewhere and lost just one of his little jewels. This guy was from the south of England and died. Presumably there's some crossover in the Venn diagram of clumsy preverts and factory deaths. Also, death by misadventure is the ruling for a death caused through non-malicious negligence or by accident in the execution of an otherwise legal act. I've seen quite a bit. Working at the OCME has been a summer job that's morphed into a side job while I've been in school. The top 3 most unusual calls I've been out on are as follows. 1. A man strung himself up, and when he jumped off his apartment balcony, he left so much slack that it just took his head off. His head was on one lady's balcony and his body was on the ground. When we were there, we couldn't find the head, so we had to knock on a couple of doors where the rope was hanging past in order to find it. 2. A man died of a heart attack while tickling his pickle. The responding officers left the naughty movie playing on the television just to make it awkward when I arrived. It was a cassette. And 3. Another man was sitting on the railroad tracks at a railroad crossing to end his tenure on Earth by train, which is very messy and annoying to have to pick up, mind you. But a drunk driver was trying to catch air over the tracks and killed the guy, but it threw his body off the tracks before the train came over a couple of minutes later. And as a bonus, a man blasted himself in the noggin with a shotty in his bedroom, but left the ceiling fan on. You know the saying, crap hit the fan? Imagine brain matter hitting his. He basically repainted his walls with an interesting splatter pattern of brain matter and blood and pieces of his face. I tried to clean up as much as I could for the wife, although I'm not required to do any cleaning of the scene. I'm actually asked not to. Sometimes I just feel bad for people. Anyways, don't shoot yourself in the head until you turn off your fan, please. Oh boy, I do wonder if talking about these incidents in such casual terms is just something that people end up doing after a while on the job. I hope I never become familiar enough with these sorts of things to talk about them like this. Former biological anthropologist. As an undergrad, I worked for a forensic anthropologist. This is the weirdest case she had had that I got to see for myself. It was from the 1920s. My boss had inherited a coroner's collection of odd or interesting bones that he'd collected during his tenure in a major city. Back then, coroners could just take whatever they wanted from bodies without telling the families. If the family was poor or indigent or an immigrant minority, then they really helped themselves, sometimes taking the whole body. This coroner took a lot of stuff, even rearticulating some of the pieces, reconstructing how they looked when they were attached to the rest of the person. So anyway, she had this collection she inherited, and several of the pieces were designated what she calls death by testosterone poisoning. They didn't literally die of testosterone, but they all died because of stupid, risky, ridiculous actions. Think of the TV show Jackass, only with no monetary payout. The weirdest one was from early last century. A white man in his 40s who had died from sepsis, from multiple arm fractures, got in an arm wrestling contest. Why multiple fractures? Because even after cracking his humerus, or upper arm bone, he couldn't bear losing. So he just wrapped it up with some kind of splint, had a guy hold the fracture, just a crack at that point, and went for best 2 out of 3, whereupon he snapped the humerus all the way through and broke his radius and ulna when he slammed his arm down on the edge of the table in anger. The preserved bones came with a whole story recounted in the coroner's notes. One of the lower arm bones, radius or ulna, I can't remember which, had protruded through the skin, and being too cheap or too stupid to see a doctor, the wound became gangrenous, and the infection entered his bloodstream. He died of septicemia a few weeks later. Looking at the bone, I could see all of the fractures as well as where the infection had attacked the periosteum and the bone itself, with no sign of healing. In short, stupid, pointless arm wrestling contest results in multiple arm fractures, gangrene, and death from septicemia. Labeled jokingly as death by testosterone poisoning by the owner of the anatomical collection the bones are a part of. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm not a medical professional or a mortician, but I think this story is relevant to the question, so I'll share it anyway. A few weeks ago, I was driving a guy to a hospital 3 hours away. He was a truly amazing man and regaled me with a myriad of fascinating tales of his youth and previous jobs. He got on to explaining to his family how he had 2 nephews, but now only had 1. I asked him what happened. Apparently, his eldest nephew, around 28, was riding his motorbike on a weekend out in the countryside here in the UK. They found him later that day, dead on the side of the road, on a corner, motorbike next to him, with no obvious signs of impact or anything that could possibly have led to his death. It took a long time for them to work out what had happened. Eventually, they found a small bruise about half an inch in width on his temple. After some investigation, they discovered that the corner of the road had just been resurfaced and had some loose stones on top. They concluded that as he rounded the corner at about 30 miles per hour, the bike had slid from underneath him. As he rolled to the side of the road, the footrest of the bike had entered the corner of the helmet, through the hole where the visor was open, and hit him in the temple, killing him instantly. Nothing reckless, no one involved, just bad luck. Sometimes that's all you need. I'm a nurse, and this 80-year-old man had fissures in his butt and was admitted to the ICU because he shoved an entire frozen D-cell-sized maglite up his butt and perforated his bowel. He went to surgery to have it removed and later died from septic shock. The maglite, however, survived. My ex-employer was a funeral director in Nebraska. He told some crazy stories. First, how he'd found a guy dead in his laundry room, glass bottle taped to the agitator on the washing machine. Broke when the guy attempted to stimulate himself by sitting on it. End result, all of his guts were in the wash tub. Second was the self-deletion by train. The guy basically shattered like a watermelon, but his brain landed perfectly intact between the tracks. Third was lots of horse-screwing stories where guys are kicked to death and found with their pants off in the stables. And finally, drunk driving farm equipment never ends well. These were generally his answer to, "What's the coolest thing you've ever seen?" My ex-employer was a sociopath, if you haven't figured it out. My dad told us that once they had a guy bleeding out on the table from a stab wound. They stopped the bleeding, but his vitals were still taking a dive. Someone pointed out there was way too much blood. They turn him over, and it's coming out of his butt. Someone had stuck a light bulb up the guy's butt, broken it, and shanked him when he tried to escape, and the guy still escaped. They stabilized him, but he died of septic shock. This was told to us over dinner, mind you. My grandfather did some work as a doctor in Indonesia. He told us stories of people who had had pathogens living in them and eating them from the inside out, some in really grotesque ways. Some people had fungus on them that basically sucked their lives away. So, not a coroner, but it was still kind of interesting and gross. The short of it was, a man died from endometrial cancer. He had had a transplant prior. The woman who gave the transplant had metastatic cancer that had spread to said organ unknowingly. The guy survived the transplant, but cancer cells from the transplanted organ populated, and he ended up dying from her cancer. I was talking recently with a friend who was an undertaker at a funeral home for about a decade, sometime in the late 70s and early 80s. This was when they were in charge of collecting bodies directly from the scene. Someone driving on a country road in Oklahoma noticed a car out in the field. A teen girl, 16 or 17, was crying and screaming hysterically. Anyway, the car was a T-top Firebird or something like that. There was a headless body in the driver's seat, a head in the back seat, along with a guy who'd been split in half at the abdomen. This girl was hysterical, so they couldn't figure out what the heck had taken place here. It turns out the driver had been sticking his head up at the top of the car while driving, and the other guy was almost sitting on the top of the open T-top. They lost control and went off the road through a barbed wire fence. One or two of the wires went up over the top of the car and cleanly severed the driver's head and the passenger in half. My friend said it took them the better part of an hour to determine what had happened. Then he collected up the pieces and went on with his day. A man fell into a septic tank and died because of suffocation rather than drowning, found after 3 days. This was one autopsy my staff let me skip as I started to retch the moment I opened the door to the autopsy site, despite wearing an airtight mask. Yeah, there's a certain amount of indignity that I just don't want to see other deceased humans in, thank you very much. Honestly, even just reading this makes me feel real bad. Ugh. Okay, so the narrator is coming back in editing to tell you that the next 2 minutes 10 seconds are one of the most awful medical stories that I've done in my time on the channel. You've been warned. Here is a second-hand experience of something my cousin went through a few years ago. It's the frickin' weirdest thing that I've ever heard, and it's worth a retelling. I need to share this with more people. So my cousin and his best bud from med school wound up at the same hospital. His friend became a mortician, and my cousin is a proctologist. One morning, my cousin gets a call from a patient he had an appointment with later that day. The patient is asking the secretary if he could come in early. His issue was getting far worse. When asked what was wrong, he refused to explain and demanded to speak with my cousin. Now, my cousin has a terrific bedside manner, the best I've ever seen. He makes it a point to speak with his patients whenever they need to. So he gets on the phone with this guy, and the guy was just pleading with him. So my cousin had an opening and told the patient to come in during that time. The patient comes in and was sitting in the exam room. Cousin walks into the room and asks him what's wrong. Patient proceeds to strip fully undressed, get on all fours and sticks his butt out at my cousin while on top of the exam table. The guy began to explain how his butt keeps leaking crap and it hurts real bad. Except my cousin apparently immediately saw that he wasn't leaking crap at all. The guy was leaking half of his goddamn intestines. Like, half a foot of intestines was just protruding from this guy's butt and would throb and pulsate with every breath that the patient took. At this point, I wish I could say my cousin got the guy the help he needed, but before my cousin could do anything, The guy just screamed, "Just yank this goddamn crap out of me, man! Get it out!" as he reached behind himself and yanked his gosh damn intestines so hard that his butthole erupted with a fountain of blood, coating the nurse and my cousin. That was apparently the most inhuman scream that Stephen, my cousin, had ever heard that day. The guy was in so much pain after yanking everything out that he passed out and fell off the exam table, smashing his head on the corner of the chair, dying instantly. So, cue Stephen's best friend, the mortician, did an autopsy, and the cause of death was pretty straightforward, all things considered. Apparently his friend found an unraveled slinky string throughout the patient's digestive tract. Like the guy took a slinky, ate it while straightening the metal out. All in all, makes me shake in anxiety just thinking about the whole thing. Oh. My goal is to not end up in a video like this when I die. I want to die in a normal way. I always found the death of Gloria Ramirez to be fascinating. Not as much in how she died, but what happened to those around her in that final hour. Staff reported magenta-colored particles in her blood just before nurses started fainting. After the third one passed out, they ended up evacuating the ER, leaving behind just a skeleton crew that tried to stabilize Ramirez unsuccessfully. The faintings and symptoms exhibited by the staff are considered to be mass hysteria to this day. My weirdest case was this one guy who'd decided not to be alive anymore. It wasn't hard to figure out, but the weird part was that he and his friends were having some sort of self-deletion race. Like who could finish things first. We realized that this guy, 21 I believe, had taken a wild cocktail of substances and booze. That was his third attempt that week. We saw that our pedestrian versus train from a week before was one of the other friends in this pact. Don't commit to finishing things by train, people. It's really messy, and we have to walk like half a mile of tracks to make sure we found you all. Plus, you're forcing the conductor to live through something that will haunt him forever. But the thing that made me mad was that this guy knew he was trying to finish his mortal affairs, yet he wore 3 damn pairs of pants. And I was in charge of undressing the body. We couldn't cut the clothes off in case the family wanted them or something. Undressing a body that's already in rigor is hard to begin with. He had a pair of jeans, then a pair of Superman pajama pants, and underneath those a pair of Charlie Brown Christmas boxers. In February. I swear he did it just to annoy the morgue worker, and that happened to be me. Another one was a guy who tied off his life story by purposefully slamming into the Jersey wall on the highway. Car stopped, his body stopped, and his heart kept going. Completely transected and fell into his thoracic cavity. Then the car burst into flames. So we had a super crispy critter that came in. He was in burn position and completely blackened to a charcoal-like state. His brain looked like a hard-boiled egg, and his blood coagulated into blood jello. That was a mess. All because his girlfriend dumped him. My mum was an ME for years, and she has a handful of interesting stories. As a kid, I grew up on pictures of cadavers, and she'd sometimes ask me to go over her reports to verify that her point was getting across. Because if a 14-year-old can understand it, so can a 40-year-old, right? Anyway, I remember 2 specific instances that brought horror to my young brain and sheer joy to hers. First was a guy who ended things via throttling himself on his wife's undies, and then there was the motorcyclist who accidentally ramped himself into some woods. His head was twisted around all demon-like. What my mum was so excited to show me was that his legs, because it was a 1 in a million case. The guy had gone spread eagle and perfectly struck 2 trees on each side of him, basically snapping off his legs. My mum was so excited. "Isn't that cool?" she exclaimed, I remember vividly. "What's the most terrifying thing you saw in the safety of your own home?" Somebody tried to break into the house while I was by myself. The whole place was quiet and dark at nighttime. I walked past the front door to go upstairs for bed, and the handle suddenly started jerking around like the Hulk was trying to get in. Then whoever it was started to either kick or shoulder the door, and it was making the whole frame jiggle. I completely froze and my mind went blank. I was just standing there like an idiot and staring. My dog bolted down the stairs like it was her time to shine, scrambled on the tiles, and let loose the most vicious barks I've ever heard. Whoever it was left. She was a very good girl. I miss her. When I was young, I came home from a party in the middle of the night when my dad was out of town. I started making a midnight quesadilla when I heard someone cough in the basement. I yelled and ran outside, and they took off through the backyard. I came to find out my dad's ex-girlfriend's daughter stole her key to our house and came to rob us. She was busted a couple of years later doing this to her sister-in-law. I was just chilling on the couch, doing whatever, when suddenly a really heavy person started sprinting in our attic. Sounded like steel-toed boots and everything. I'm a really small woman, so I immediately freaked out, thinking there was a gigantic man stomping around my home. Then the screaming starts, literal frickin' screaming, like something from The Exorcist, and there's multiple voices. I snuck outside and cried, extremely shaken, and called the cops. Guess what's in my attic? Not a big grapey grapist. No, it's raccoons. Also, the raccoons were mating. That's what the screaming was coming from. I went crying to the cops about randy raccoons. I was home for the weekend from uni, but my parents and siblings were away, so I was home alone. Our house is quite a bit secluded, with a church and graveyard next door, and closest neighbors up the street but quite a bit away. I had all of the doors locked, and I was settling down to watch a movie when the doorbell started ringing, so I went to answer it. There was no one there. Then the back doorbell rang, and no one was there again. This keeps happening over and over, and it's pitch black outside. Then whoever it was began banging on the windows and yelling. At this point I'm freaking out, so I begin to call the police and yell at the people outside that I've called them, when it turns out it's a couple of fellas from uni playing a prank on me. I was terrified and reduced to tears at this point, but they thought it was hilarious. They did a few more things like that to me over the 2 to 3 years I was at uni with them, and I always thought of them as friends. I'm older and wiser now to know that they're just C-words. I was home alone one night while my wife and son were visiting my mother-in-law. I walked back to our bedroom to see someone rummaging through my son's room on the video baby monitor. I immediately grabbed my Glock and yelled at the other side of the house, "I'm armed! Come out slowly!" over and over while slowly making my way to his room. I got there, flipped on the light, and nothing. Searched the whole house, pumped full of adrenaline. Finally satisfied I was alone, I went back to my room and the guy was back in the room. I took a closer look, and I'm ashamed to say I was looking at myself. The camera is a live feed on our Wi-Fi, and it was streaming on a huge delay. I've never known it to do that, and it hasn't done it since. In short, went looking for myself and came back empty-handed. This was written in 2020, and I have to say that I don't know which part of the world you are living in for the internet to be that slow, even during a hurricane or some such. I mean, the presence of the firearm would imply the US, but that connection speed sounds like outback Australia. I was about 21 or 22 and living by myself at the time, and I left my window open on a pleasant night. It was low enough to the ground that you could get in if you really tried, but the screen wasn't easy to take off, and I lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, so I didn't even think twice about it. I woke up in the middle of the night because I smelled smoke, and I reached up to turn on my lamp, and my hand hit what was very obviously a person. My brain fully woke up at that point, and I realized there was a shirtless man in my bedroom smoking a cigarette and staring at me. And I remember yelling for him to get out, and I must have spooked him just as badly as he spooked me, because he leapt out of my window and took off. I slammed it shut and moved a bookcase in front of it, and when I went out the next morning in the daylight, I found the screen sitting against the house. I did not sleep the rest of the night, and I haven't slept with a window more than cracked ever since. I absolutely refuse to live on the ground floor of a building now. I don't know if he was planning to rob me or commit the unspeakable act or both, but it was definitely terrifying and makes me wonder how many times it happened that I didn't wake up for. A few years back, I was home alone during a power storm. I went into the bathroom to take a dump, and at the exact time I was crapping, I sneezed. Well, the power went out at the same time. The house was pitch black, and I literally thought I crapped myself blind. I couldn't see my hands, so in a panic I was yelling, "No, this can't be true! It's impossible!" I was in a panic, feeling for the toilet paper to wipe and flush. After completing that task, I just sat on the loo, trying to figure out how to tell everyone I knew that I'd literally crapped myself blind by sneezing while crapping. After about 2 minutes of complete darkness and dread and panic, lightning struck outside and lit up my hallway. That was the best feeling ever. Not exactly alone, but I was in my home with my newborn son and someone knocked on the front door. I was expecting my mother, but she usually comes in through the garage. I thought it was strange, but I yelled, "Come in," because why wouldn't I? Then this old woman, off her head, comes stumbling through the door and asks me for a ride to the nearest gas station. I told her that I didn't have a car seat for my son, so I couldn't go anywhere, and she just started screaming, "That's just inappropriate!" and doesn't stop yelling even when I'm telling her that she needs to leave or I'll call the cops. After a minute or so, my mother actually pulls into the driveway. The smackhead sees the car and bolts out the door. I never see her again. That night, my truck got broken into. I can't say for sure whether it was the same woman, but I gave her description to the cops anyway. When I was 19 in my first apartment, I had someone knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw this burly, heavy-set man who abruptly started screaming to let him in. He was screaming things like he was going to beat my butt, kick down the door if I didn't open. I called the cops, and as soon as someone got on the phone, he started body slamming the door to break in. I was freaking out and crying, but luckily 5 cops showed up within 5 minutes. As soon as he heard the sirens, he quickly walked away and they met him at the bottom of the stairs. Apparently, he was a previous renter but was extremely intoxicated. They arrested him and thankfully he never came back. I ended up breaking my lease and moving out 3 months later. It was in a very nice neighborhood, but it quickly made me wish I was back home with my family instead of being on the other side of the United States. My mom had something similar happen to her a year or so ago. She lives in a high-rise and all of the floors look identical in the hall. A drunk man tried to get into her apartment and started yelling and screaming at her to let him in. She called the building security and they came to deal with him. He lived a couple of floors above her. I lit 2 long taper candles for some ambience while I was playing guitar late at night. I was facing the other direction, looking out at the window while playing, and shortly after turned around and went back towards the candles and discovered one of them was completely gone. The stand was still there, but no melted wax, just a bare candle holder, and the other one was still lit and no shorter than it had been when I lit them. It was almost 3 a.m. and I was so terrified that I got in my car and left and drove to my dad's house. When I was like 14, I was home alone one night and around 10 p.m. stood up in my kitchen making some cereal. It was dark outside and then all of a sudden, the loudest sound. Some drunk woman literally launched a hammer through my kitchen window. It was so loud and glass was everywhere. I followed her down the street while calling the cops. It was pretty strange. For those wondering why I'd follow a vandal, she looked like a very fragile old smackhead lady. She could barely walk or see straight and she started stumbling away, mumbling some crap once she had done it. Plus, I didn't really know how the frick I was going to explain this crap to my parents if I didn't have a solid answer. But yeah, it was a very distressing walk while following her. Definitely an action caused by adrenaline as well. One afternoon, someone knocked at my back door. I thought it was the guy coming to read AmITheA, so I opened the door. Next thing I know, 2 huge guys pushed into the house and one of them threw me up against the wall. Then they shoved me down on the couch. They told me they were Hell's Angels and they were angry because my boyfriend was selling too much, cutting into their profits. They kept calling me by my next-door neighbor's name. We'd suspected they were selling smack before. All of the people passing by that place for less than 5 minutes made it pretty obvious. I just kept telling them I wasn't her. One of them searched the house while the other one kept me pinned to the couch. They started to realize they were in the wrong house because they couldn't find anything where they were told it was. My neighbor's house is a single floor with a basement. My house is a 4-level back split. Then I showed them my mail because it showed my name and they knew they messed up. They started telling me that they were after my neighbor's boyfriend because he committed the unspeakable act on their cousin, which I knew was BS by now, but I didn't care, I just wanted them to leave. They robbed me of my cash and left. I now have locks on my screen door. Huh. Well, although it was bullcrap that you got robbed even though they picked the wrong house, I'd honestly still say you might have gotten off lightly, all things considered. Glad that you were all right. I was asleep while home alone. When I turned over in bed, I casually opened my eyes a little whilst turning, and they were shut again just as quickly. In that split second, I could have sworn I'd seen a man stood at the bottom of my bed. I laid still, awake with my eyes closed, trying to act like I was awake, and listening for any sound in the room for someone breathing or moving. I couldn't hear anything. I was too scared to open my eyes and look, and consoled myself that there wasn't any way someone could have gotten in without me hearing a window smash, and I fell back asleep. When I got up in the morning, the front door was open. They didn't take anything and left no signs of being there. It was still very creepy though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've lived on my own a long time and I don't get scared easily. I just finished reading in bed and I turned my lamp off and settled down to go to sleep and hugged my cat up close to me. This would be about 1:30 in the morning. I closed my eyes and I heard a voice saying, meow, like imitating a cat. My window was open though, so I thought it was just someone being weird outside. I opened my eyes and in the middle of my bedroom was a small boy wearing a red jumper waving his arms above his head. I leapt up like a goddamn ninja and put the light on. There was now nothing there. My heart was going mad. Now, nothing paranormal has happened in this house over the entire time I've lived there. I spent the whole night totally freaked out, only getting a bit of sleep when it started to get light again. My friends thought this was hilarious when I told them. I was saying that there's no way I'm living in a haunted house, and I started Googling cleansing, exorcists, and whatnot. The next few nights, other weird stuff started happening. I started sleeping with the TV on, and as soon as I tried to get any sleep, I'd hear freaky voices coming from it, or I'd notice shadows dip by the sides of my bed. It was dreadful. I actually resorted to saying out loud, "I'm really tired, so if you could not haunt me for one night, I'd be really grateful." I'd never believed in any of this sort of stuff before, so it was like an entire paradigm shift for me. Anyway, I was going on about this to my friends at work, and one of them asked if I was on substances. Well, funnily enough, I just started taking this new tablet, montelukast, for my asthma. When I got home, I read the side effects, and a rare one was hallucinations. I stopped taking them, no more hauntings. In short, medication made me see ghosts. I got a 5-channel sound system. Nothing too fancy, but the best I'd ever had. I watched an action film and heard the creaking door to my left in the distance. I had to clear my home as I thought there was an intruder. Nope, just better stereo sound. I had the police knock one day while I was alone. The cop had a guy in the back of his car who said we were holding his friend captive. I showed the cop my ID and explained it was just me and my husband. He wasn't home, but they could look if they wanted to. The cop said, "No, that's okay," and then asked questions about my neighbors. And that's how you got away with murder. The cleaning lady tried to self-delete in our bathroom. She died 4 days later. My boyfriend worked away from home a lot, and I always struggled to sleep on the first night he was away. On this occasion, I was woken by the sound of a man shouting and then someone banging on wood or a front door. I jumped up and looked out my bedroom window, just in time to see a man dressed all in black walking through our garden toward the house. I ran to the front of the house to look out the front window and made sure he kept going. He did, but he met up with another man dressed in black walking towards my house as well. I was terrified and I called the cops. They arrived in a matter of minutes and checked out the back garden, but the guys were gone. Turned out a neighbor had caught them both trying to steal his car, and one had escaped through the gardens while the other had run through the roads, and they'd met up outside my house. I didn't sleep at all that night, and my brother came to stay the next one. I'm so glad I live in an apartment now. Much more security. I work from home, so I'm home alone a lot. One day I was working, and out of the corner of my eye I noticed some movement in my backyard. There was a man jumping over my fence. Panicked, I call my then boyfriend, now fiancé, and tell him what's happening. While I was on the phone with him, I got a knock at my front door. It's a woman from CenturyLink informing me that technicians will need access to my backyard. I tell her someone just jumped my fence, so I think they're already there. Way to give me a heart attack, CenturyLink. Sleep paralysis. Waking up from a nightmare soaked in sweat with a weight on my chest and completely unable to move. Sometimes I see shadowy shapes or feel there's someone watching. I get auditory hallucinations when I'm tired that's brought on by my anxiety. The one that caused the worst anxiety attack I'd had in months was just as I was drifting off to sleep, a guy yelled, "Hey!" right in my ear, and I launched myself out of the bed before realizing what had happened. You know those tongs in the kitchen that have a spring but a latch to keep them together? I had a pair of those and I put the latch on and put them down on the counter. I went away for a bit and came back and they jumped off the counter at me. Biggest jump scare of my life. The latch had come undone and they sprung open. But in the millisecond when inanimate objects suddenly come to life and jump at you, you don't realize this and totally freak out. The narrator has a stainless steel kitchen unit that pops violently between slightly convex and concave when he puts hot pots on it. And let me tell you, going from peacefully cooking to having the bejesus scared out of you when there's a bang and all of your kitchen implements hop off the unit is pretty damn scary. I was living alone after my ex-husband moved out, and the creepy guy across the street, who was 20 years my senior and enjoyed a variety of substances, kept trying to date me. He would not leave me alone when I left my house or arrived home, and he'd threatened to commit the unspeakable act on me. I just started dating my current boyfriend, and he helped hang up motion-detecting lights outside. I started carrying pepper spray and leaving the alarm on whenever I was home. My boyfriend and I also agreed that if I didn't text him for a certain period of time and he couldn't get a hold of me, that he'd go to my house and check up on things. I also CC'd him on my work calendar just in case. It got so scary that my boyfriend actually moved in a lot sooner than we'd planned because I felt so unsafe. After the creepy guy watched my boyfriend move in and saw him pottering around with project cars in the driveway, he stopped and moved away a few months later. I've never felt so unsafe in my own home, wondering if our outside lights had turned on because of the neighbor's cat or because creepy guy was trying to break in. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key in our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now, this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he'd returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking that he hadn't heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point, I got the feeling that something wasn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point, she'd spent the entire evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shakier voice. "Dad? Is that you? Please respond, was repeating in my head, but the silence continued. Now, at this point, I was freaking out and literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly got up and started walking towards the other end of the room, which led to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and begin opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. And I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown, creepy noise without anything to protect myself. When the door was finally open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mum, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of the house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me she thought my dad had come home as well, as she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time, as we were still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he hadn't come back earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. One day while I was working afternoons a couple of years back, I woke up around 10 a.m. and started to watch American Dad before getting up. Next thing you know, I hear my back door open, a normal thing in our home since we only use the back door. But nobody was supposed to be home yet. I assumed it was my mum and didn't think anything of it. Then I heard the footprints coming up the stairs as my bedroom was on the second floor. I called out to my mum and got no response. Then my door cracked open and a head popped in. It was a 30-year-old man with a blonde beard and a big mane of greasy hair who looks so shocked to see me. At the time, I was about 260 pounds, 6'3" and 20 years old. I was also sitting in only my boxers. Before I was able to realize what was happening, he asked, "Is this the Paulson residence?" To which I reply, "No?" He makes a swift exit, and before I can recollect my thoughts, he's not even in my driveway. I talked to a family friend who's a veteran cop. Turns out this man has been pulling this kind of stunt to rob people in nearby towns. A few years ago, I was home alone in my basement playing video games when I hear the door that connects my kitchen to the garage creak open and slam shut, but I never heard the actual mechanical garage door open. Then I heard heavy footsteps of someone wearing boots walk the length of my kitchen directly above me. I originally thought, my brother must have forgot something, as he had left about 5 minutes before that for work. So I was about to yell up to him to make fun of him, but something in the back of my mind was telling me, hold on, something's not quite right here. So I muted my TV to hear better and stay quiet. Then I heard the footsteps turn around and walk back to the door, and again I hear it creak open and slam shut. But again, I never heard the actual mechanical garage door open or close. So I walk slowly upstairs, thinking maybe my brother just forgot to close the garage door. I slowly open the door to my garage and see that the garage door has been closed the entire time. The only two explanations I can come up with are either something paranormal happened, or someone broke into my house, walked through my kitchen, and left without taking anything, whilst also not letting me hear them open my garage door. In my opinion, both are equally terrifying to me. What's the stupidest argument you've ever gotten dragged into for way too long? Fighting with my brother about which fruit would win if they were sentient and could fight. My wife and I got into a shouting match as to whose friend's wedding we would attend if they scheduled them for the same weekend. Neither of those friends was even engaged yet, by the way. When I was 6, my friend and I stood facing each other, arguing about which hand was your left and which was your right. It took us about 5 minutes to realize that when standing opposite someone, your left is their right. I was living with a pal and we were getting on each other's nerves. One night we were arguing about whether to break spaghetti noodles in half. I finally said, "You cook yours your way, broken, and I'll cook mine unbroken." He took half of the spaghetti from the package and broke the noodles in half. He put them in boiling water and started stirring, while I stood there with the package. Mostly we glared at each other and then he reminded me to add my half to the pot. After I did it, he then thought of something. How are we gonna separate the long noodles from the short ones? We argued about the color of lobsters before being cooked. They only catch the red ones for eating. Duh. I had an ex argue with me over which would weigh more, a pound of bricks or a pound of feathers. We went back and forth forever while I tried to explain it to her. It didn't help when her mother chimed in with, "What about a pound of wet feathers?" The apple does not fall far from the tree, apparently. Oh no, her mother knew what she was doing. She tossed a grenade into the conversation and walked away. Way back when I was a phone service advisor for a credit card company, this lady called in confused as heck about a piece of mail we'd sent her. "I don't understand why you sent me a bill. I paid for the TV at the store with my card." "Yes, ma'am. Now, this is the bill for using your credit card." "But I used my credit card. Why would I have to pay again?" This went on for about a good hour. This poor excuse for an adult believed that a credit card was just an all-access pass to buy anything you wanted for free. That was a devastating job. A couple of years later, after being promoted, I was processing some emails to customers and received an email asking, "How do I email customer service?" You just did. My wife and I got into a screaming match because our broccoli wasn't growing as well as we thought it should, and clearly it was the other person's fault. Marriage, where the big things matter less and the little things are explosive. "Honey, I got fired." "That's okay, sweetie, we'll work through this together." "Honey, I moved the cereal to the left side of the pantry." "Are you freaking kidding me, Sean? The right side is clearly more easily accessible. I want a divorce!" This feels very true for a lot of relationships I've seen. Contrary to the saying, couples do in fact seem to not so much sweat the small stuff as go into a screaming frenzy about it, while remaining strong and united against major outside factors. The arguments you have where someone's venting at you about something infuriating and you even agree with them, but they're so mad that they want to argue with you about it, even though you agree with them and say yes throughout the conversation. My friend once tried to argue that Token, the black character in South Park, was named as such because black people are stereotypically always toking on Mary J. and Smack. I argued that it was because he was the token black character. My friend and I are both smokers. We were talking to my other friend who wasn't. The non-smoking friend was saying how bad smoking is and that we should both quit, and my smoking friend was arguing that smoking wasn't bad for you at all and he had no reason to quit. Now, at first, I thought he was joking, but no, he was deadly serious. I informed him he was wrong and that smoking does indeed kill people, and he got angry, screamed that we were lying, and then left and hasn't spoken to me since. This was like 6 years ago. No, he's not dead, he's just stupid. Not me, but my parents. They got into an argument about a little bit of sauce getting wasted because it came out too fast. My dad got angry about it because he just quit smoking, and they haven't spoken to each other for nearly 2 days now. My parents go on YouTube too, so I hope they see this and realize how stupid they're being. At the deli in grocery stores, you can buy these cherry peppers that are stuffed with prosciutto and cheese. Well, my dad and I love these things, and one day he bought a bunch of them. Then, through the course of a week, we ate them all. Except one, which sat in the container for 3 days uneaten. So, I ate it, and that's where I went wrong. 2 weeks went by before my dad would speak to me again, simply because I ate the last pepper before he did. My friend tooted. I asked him, "Did you just fart?" "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "No, I didn't, you freaking liar." Silence and a horrible smell. He was the only one with me in that room, and he is known for lying. "Oh, he didn't fart. He crapped himself." "Oh God, no." I once got in an argument with my roommate about who could raise the fastest duck. I was in a fraternity in college, and a sorority had invited us to participate in a rubber duck race fundraiser where the rubber ducks would float down a creek through campus and the person that bought the winning duck got a prize. Being the smart aleck I am, I asked the sorority president if I could enter a real duck. She didn't believe I would and said, "Yeah, sure, whatever, John." Later that night, my roommate and I got drunk and got in a heated debate over who could raise the faster duck. We woke up the next morning and headed to the nearest poultry farm where we each bought a duckling and raised it for the next month and a half. Their names were Cheese and Quackers, naturally. One day I came home to find all sorts of witchcraft spellbooks strewn about our counter. I asked him what they were, and he opened one up, grabbed my duck and started cursing it. Apparently he had gone to a palm reader to seek advice as a joke. We kept them in our fenced-in backyard, and the day after he had cursed my duck, a storm blew down our fence and our ducks escaped. I still blame the voodoo curse to this day. My duck, Quackers, easily would have won, and he had to resort to consulting the great beyond to ruin the entire race for both of us. In short, I had the faster duck, but I was foiled by a curse. My friend was convinced selfish was pronounced shellfish. I wrote the word out, sounded it out, and it was like I was saying the sun was blue. She just wouldn't have it. I don't know if she was screwing with me, but 2 or 3 years after that whole argument, we got in a whole different thing about her basically being a witch, and she says, "Sorry, I was being shellfish." I couldn't stay mad at that moron, and no, I'm not friends with Sean Connery. The argument he was defending was that if you go on someone's property, you're their property. Needless to say, he isn't very bright. He's locked up in my garage now. A woman I used to work with at a university got into an argument with me because she didn't believe the different races of humans were in fact the same species. Her final argument? "No, you're wrong. It's like whites and Native Americans are just like fish and dolphins. They're both in the ocean, but not the same species. Now do you get it?" No, not really. And not at all coincidentally, this was the worst group of co-workers I've ever had. A conversation between Jane, Bill, and I. Jane said, "It was about -40 outside in the winters." Bill asked, "Celsius or Fahrenheit?" So I piped in, "Oh, they're actually the same at -40. "Really?" said Jill. But no, Bill had to weigh in, "No, they aren't. You're talking crap." I said, "I'm 99% sure that they are the same at -40. I have a physics degree. You're an idiot." Bill then went on to reference my idiocy twice more over the course of the evening. Bill is a C-word, and no one likes to talk to him at parties. My friend's car battery died, and I suggested we push-start it. In Ireland, where the vast majority of cars are manual, every person in the country has once been beckoned to push-start a car. My friend said, "No, you can't push-start a car," and eventually started calling me an idiot and all sorts. She was so adamant that she was correct, she rang a mutual friend, a mechanic, and asked him the question, and he replied, "Of course you can push a car. Who the frick is saying you can't?" If she's like half the other people in these stories, I'm surprised you found out the truth, as most of these people would just hang up the phone and claim that the person agreed with them. Because there's a whole bunch of denial going on in these stories. When did people get so sure of themselves? Be curious, folks. My cousin said that her laptop was overheating and making a buzzing sound. Her friend piped up and commented that it was definitely a virus and she should take it to Geek Squad to have it removed. I said, "No, it's not a virus, it's probably your fan. Your fan is messed up, it's probably just dusty, just try cleaning that out. Note that I'm not an IT professional, but come on." This girl got righteously ticked off and told me that, no, it was a virus and she knows because she had the same issue with her laptop a few months ago and Geek Squad fixed it. This went back and forth a bit, with me insisting that a virus doesn't affect the fan function. It was literally a hardware issue, and she was talking to me like she couldn't believe how fricking stupid I was to not realize that a virus was making my cousin's laptop fan bog down. I finally explained to her how viruses work, and she stomped her foot like a child and exploded that, "It's still a virus! The virus just deleted the file that runs the fan." I stared at her in disbelief. The file that runs the fan? What is that? Fan.exe? And she said, "Finally, you get it." She was so convinced that this was the case that my cousin, not noted for her critical thinking skills, believed her and said she'd just take the laptop in to have it checked and cleaned. Whatever, you want to pay out the butt to have some smug D-bag at Geek Squad, quote, "fix your laptop? It ain't my business." My friend said, "If you're driving 60 kilometers per hour, you're driving 1 kilometer per minute." I said, "No, you're driving almost 2 kilometers per minute." She snapped back, "Are you on smack or something?" You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. That human blood is blue before it hits oxygen, which is why your veins are blue. This led to 5th grade me poking myself with pins for hours to see if I could see it change from blue to red, while my brother kept me at it by telling me I wasn't doing it fast enough. God damn older brothers. I had an extended argument about whether or not Oregon Trail, the game, promoted communism. Like, this was 20 to 30 minutes of arguing. No, it doesn't. You would say that, you frickin' commie. That lake water is wetter than pool water. At my old job, I'd gone to get something off the printer, and when I got back to my desk, the director came over to me and pulled me into his office for a word. "Jenny, you need to make sure you're wearing shoes." "I am wearing shoes." "You weren't just then when you walked to the printer." Yes, I was." "No, you weren't. I saw that you weren't wearing shoes. Please make sure you're wearing shoes in my office. It's for health and safety." "I was wearing shoes." "No, you weren't." "Yes, I was. I was wearing shoes." "No, you weren't." "Why wouldn't I be wearing shoes? Why would I take off my shoes to go to the printer and then immediately put them back on when I get to my desk?" "Listen, just make sure you're wearing shoes at all times." I'm still baffled. I was wearing my freaking shoes. Oh, and here's a bonus, equally stupid argument. I was about 13, and me and my friend were watching TV at our house. An advert came on for Go Ahead biscuits. My friend said, "Those taste disgusting." "Yeah," I agreed. "Have you even tried them?" "Yes." I hadn't, but I didn't want to admit my lie. "No, you haven't." "Yes, I have." "All right then, what do they taste like?" "Disgusting." "You haven't even tried them." "Yes, I have." This angered her for some reason, so she slapped me and I slapped her back. "That was harder," she said, hitting me back harder, and I hit her back even harder. We spent the next 10 minutes hitting each other, progressively getting harder and more violent until we'd both fallen off the sofa and were full-on scrapping on the floor. There were tears, bruises, it was vicious. We didn't speak for about 2 hours after that until we eventually realized how ridiculous it all was and started laughing hysterically, and then we cried some more, and then we hugged. That may top the shoes argument, in fairness. One day, my girlfriend was a huge jerk all day, treating me like crap, yelling at me, and then finally saying, "Well, at least I didn't kiss another person while we were together." Dumbstruck, I asked her when that happened. She said, "Yesterday, at your friend's party." "That's weird. I went to school and then work and then came over and we went to bed." It was at this point that we realized it was a dream. Thanks, lady. A phone number I frequently call ends in 6272. I remember that by dialing NASA. Friends of mine vehemently disagreed and said that I was dialing the wrong number. The correct number was Napa. They're the same letters on those numbers on the keypad. My dad and I got into a yelling match about who tooted in the car. There were only 2 of us in the car as well. He tooted and he won using the "I'll ground you" trump card. My friend tried to put aluminium foil in the microwave, so I and literally every other person we asked, from friends to complete strangers, tried to explain that it wouldn't end well. They strongly believed, and I quote, "It just makes a little light show in the microwave." Some people have pointed out you can put it in for a short time, so I'll add some more context. My friend wanted to put food on top of aluminium foil and then put it in the microwave for 30 to 60 seconds, because at the time we had no plate and he thought aluminium foil would work. Any of the theoretical arguments my wife and I have from time to time. For example, we recently had an argument about how we'd furnish the non-existent, hypothetical 8-bedroom mansion we'd live in if we were billionaires. She wanted it to be full of antiques, and I wanted a stylish and futuristic minimalist theme. My college roommate and I didn't speak for 3 weeks because of an argument regarding toilet paper roll placement. It started off as a discussion, then an argument, then got to the point where he called my sister a working girl and I broke his wrist. Over. The toilet roll goes over. One of my colleagues thought that beef came from a pig. Are you freaking serious? You know, the hamburger has a lot to answer for in modern society. I swear it's set back a lot of children and at least one adult on what animal goes in what meat. My mum's a super religious and superstitious person, so whenever I'd say something negative, we'd have to cancel it by saying, "Cancel, cancel, cancel," so that whatever bad thing we said wouldn't come true. So one day my sister did something stupid and 12-year-old me said, "You're stupid and I hope you die." My mum heard me from the other room and screamed at me, "Cancel it!" I said, "No." "Cancel it 3 times. "Fine. Cancel." I said 3 times, mister. "No." "Cancel it 2 more. "Cancel. 1 more. Just a long pause from me. "Go to your room, you're grounded." "Cancel, cancel, cancel. I'm sorry, Mum, please." So yeah. I was a vegan for a few years and joined a club kinda organization. We'd swap recipes, talk about new products, and just hang out. Most of the people were pretty awesome, but like any group of people, some of them were a bit loony. There was this one girl who thought all animals could choose to be vegan. In her opinion, a wolf could just decide one day, "I want to avoid animal products." So she'd talk about wanting to go to speak to wild animals about the benefits of a vegan diet. I tried to tell her that animals really couldn't just go vegan, and she suggested that we feed them soy-based meat alternatives. We all tried to help her understand that animals can't, and she refused to believe us. She eventually stopped coming to the get-togethers. Thankfully, she refused to own pets, so no animals directly suffered from her beliefs. They just had to listen to her talk when she went out converting. I once argued with a girlfriend about whether or not we were going to have an argument. My girlfriend got angry at me because apparently I was mean to her in a dream. My friend and I got into an argument over whether chocolate would kill my dog. Of course, I was arguing that it would kill the dog, and he was arguing that it wouldn't. Eventually, he went home and I went to bed. Woke up to my dog vomiting violently under the bed. I could smell chocolate. That monumental idiot. I rushed my dog to the vet, and he needed to know how much chocolate my dog may have ingested. I called my friend, but he denied feeding my dog any. He had 80% dark chocolate when he was over. My other friend was in the car with him when I called. Apparently, he turned to her after hanging up the phone and said, I might have fed him a couple of squares to prove my point. My dog ended up in intensive care at the vet's for days. On an IV and carefully watched, he pulled through. The vet said that throwing up the chocolate so quickly undoubtedly saved his life. The stupid argument that almost cost my dog his life. Needless to say, I'm no longer friends with that jerk. My colleague and I spent half a day arguing about what would be best, burp confetti or fart glitter. Thank you, Internet, for giving us wonderful things. Men in tights vs. Princess Bride. Dude, that's like saying, do you want tacos or nachos tonight? Just have tacos with a side of nachos. One doesn't have to be the best. When I was about 14, I got in an argument with a classmate about whether or not the sun was burning. I said it wasn't because the definition of burning is a reaction with oxygen. Nuclear fusion is not burning. I couldn't convince him. His anger increased until he almost became violent, but I couldn't let this go. Some teacher overheard this argument and sent us to the physics teacher to solve the issue. Well, this sent me on an interesting learning journey. The narrator went on a bit of an internet binge and can say it all comes down to what your definition of a burn is. But in most strictly scientific descriptions, burning entails combustion, and most of the sun's heat is the product of a huge nuclear reaction. And even then, the narrator with his history degree doesn't feel like he's qualified enough to defend his viewpoint further. An "I'm breaking up with you" April Fool's joke led to the real thing, and I'm glad that it did. I once argued with a drunk guy who was telling me it took years for the light from the sun to reach the earth. I had a computer science teacher who didn't know anything about technology. We got into arguments because she insisted that a degree in creative writing would be the best way to prepare yourself for an IT job rather than a degree in computer science. 30 FPS versus 60 FPS. My buddy and I smoked a bunch of green herb, then had an argument while watching the Food Network at 10 a.m. instead of going to our class. Is it touche or touchette? We frickin' had it out, telling each other why our version was correct, and more importantly, why the other party was gayer than 8 guys giving down-under kisses to 9 guys. We brawled in the living room for like 20 minutes. Oh sure, we could have just gone into the other room and Googled it, but these roasted potatoes with scallion and honey mustard vinaigrettes looked frickin' ridiculous. Could you believe Guy Fieri's fridge has a racing stripe? Man. Eventually, we decided who cares and put on Mario Kart. But I mean, secretly I knew he was wrong because, in my mind, of course it has a silent T, it's French is such a dumb argument. I miss college. When my daughter was 3, we were driving home together from the park and Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven came on the radio. She told me to change the station, it was a bad song, and I told her, no, it's the best song ever, you should listen to it. She then proceeded to tell me, I hate this song. I was like, you're 3, this is the best song ever, and you don't know anything about it. Oh my god, I'm arguing with a 3-year-old. We got home and she took a nap. What happened that destroyed a wedding without warning? Well, I wasn't born at the time, but my parents rented the observation deck on the Hancock Building in Boston for their reception. Tallest building in the city, beautiful view. My dad pored over historic weather charts to figure out what day was statistically most likely to be nice out. Day of the wedding comes, and of course, thick fog unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Couldn't see a thing out of the windows of the room they'd picked specifically for the view. It worked out well though, they were happily married for nearly 30 years before illness took my dad a few years ago. There's one other funny anecdote to that wedding, though. The wedding was held in King's Chapel, which is an incredibly historic church in downtown Boston that's something of a major tourist attraction. Turns out it wasn't even that expensive to close it for one afternoon for a wedding. The tourists waiting outside the church didn't know that, though, and someone started the rumor that my parents were incredibly wealthy, maybe even Kennedys. As a result, there were tons of people taking photos of them when they left the ceremony. Not sure if any of them ever figured out that my parents most certainly were not rich or famous. When I was 6 or 7, I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little old me, so much sugar everywhere, basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom, passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the dance floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, turns out uncle had had a stroke and died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family left. Bright side is the marriage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he'd be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end, he was too unwell to attend, despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. I played a wedding where, as we started playing the set, everyone ran outside and nobody was anywhere to be seen for the rest of the night. I originally assumed it was just because nobody liked the band, us. But the bride came in afterwards and said there was a huge fight involving multiple members of both families and everyone basically went home upset, injured, or in a police van. We couldn't stop playing since we were paid and it was our job, and the only person watching was the drunk uncle dancing on his own, asking for requests that we didn't know. The drunk uncle dancing by himself all night sounds like something that would happen at a Sims wedding. It does indeed sound like something from The Sims, but as an old-hand hospitality worker, let me tell you that this is one of those points where The Sims is eerily realistic. At the end of any given party, there's always one guy on the dance floor. My dad and stepmom's wedding was a crap show. For context, her family was terrible on both sides. She had an angry, violent father, neglectful alcoholic mother, and step-parents who didn't care about her much. She basically ran to my father to get away from it all when she was 15. Bigger problem was, my dad was 26, also a violent bully, and just a real frickin' crap show of a person. On my father's side of things, he hated his mother and blamed everything wrong in his life on her, as he did to most women in his family, later doing it to the same stepmom we're talking about. So the wedding was doomed to just be awful. It started when my stepmom was just walking down the aisle. She'd reconnected with her father in the last year and had recently been in a fight with her stepfather, so it was just her dad walking her. There was a branch in the way, it was an outdoor wedding, but he pulled it out of the way for her. As she thanks him, he lets go and flings it back into her face and collapses laughing. She awkwardly chuckles, no doubt knowing he's going to get mad at her if she shows she's upset, and the day continues, but she's visibly upset after. After the toasts, some people didn't drink the champagne that had been set out. The one thing she had asked of her mum was that she not drink. Her mum was even given sparkling juice rather than champagne. So while stepmom is changing into her reception dress, her mum goes table to table pounding down all the alcohol she can get her hands on. A cousin of mine who doesn't know what's happening starts chanting, "Chug, chug, chug, chug." And then my poor stepmom walks back into the room to see her mother downing the last drink and then denying she had done it. My cousin slips out of the tent once he realizes what's going on and leaves the two alone to argue. Stepmom comes out crying a few minutes later, goes back to her car and doesn't come back for a good 20 minutes. While all of that's happening, Grandma pulls up and starts cursing out my dad for a ton of crap, including marrying a kid who she hates. And by the way, my stepmom was only a year younger than my dad at the time. Then complaining about people not letting her invite a friend to the wedding, and then Dad owing Grandma a bunch of money. Dad tells her to F off and she leaves. Then my dad got mad at my stepmom for being gone so long, accused her of either being a baby for crying or lying and cheating on him. So she sat down on the fringes and tried not to cry and also remain visible to my dad for the next several hours. They might have been dating for 10 years, but the marriage only lasted 6 months. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones, I can tell you. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilt on wedding dresses, the lot. The one I'll never forget, it was an all-day do with a small ceremony, a few close friends and family, with a big reception filled with a huge buffet, every kind of food you could imagine, and free bar. All in the same venue. They'd booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but 30 guests turned up at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive, beautiful converted barn, loads of food and drink, Great music, but no guests. At about 10 p.m., the venue was licensed until 11, the buffet food had barely been touched, the few people who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new couple could take it home, and her response of, "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming," was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life. No more guests showed up. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance at about 10:30, and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just the taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It's the only event I've ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 p.m., the place was empty. In a nutshell, bride's parents paid for the day, and the happy couple had zero control over their guests list. Her parents had invited all of their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving a crap about an invite to a wedding where they didn't know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods that was a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of and set up, so you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea, and there were none. We needed tables to set up the food, and there were none of those either. I somehow whipped up an impromptu everything for the missing things, just as the bride and groom were arriving. We blew the fuse for our only power source, and the place was plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker, I moved some stuff around, and blew the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening, through speeches, the first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up, and found out that when we blew the fuses, the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said, "Forget about it, we'll take them back dirty," and the crew and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing the dishes. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. The mother of the groom was an alcoholic for many years. She decided to quit drinking cold turkey a few days before the wedding. During the reception, she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital via ambulance. My God, a great resolution and gesture gone horribly wrong. That sucks for everyone. Maybe get specialist advice before you make a radical lifestyle change like this, folks? Although I can't point the finger, I wouldn't have guessed that would happen. I was best man at my sister-in-law's wedding. I'd stepped in for the brother of the groom. That's another story entirely. For a whole year of planning, all the bride, my sister-in-law, wanted was a dove release when they said handwritten vows to each other. Very small, non-denominational wedding. Most of the family were atheists. Day arrives, it was early summer, and something was off with the bird handlers. They showed up a bit late and were sourcing help from the wedding party to get everything in line. When the time comes to say their vows, I help the handler carry the chest with the doves in it over to what is to be the altar where the bride and the groom are standing. The vows are just about wrapping up and the handler gives me the signal to open the chest. I open it and see 20 to 30 dead doves in the crate. I immediately close it to try and limit who knows what happened, but too late. The look of horror on the bride's face was all that I needed. We spent the next few hours trying to cheer everyone up, but by the end of the reception, the entire wedding party had organized and filed animal cruelty complaints on the handler. It was all anyone could focus on. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge and waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everyone was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500 feet. I attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone, and much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great, he did 2 copies, one edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. Release the Aunt Snyder cut, or actually the Snide Aunt cut. Nobody turned up to the reception except myself and my partner. There were about 8 people there in total, and the couple had gone all out for it. It was so awkward. I was a guest of a friend of the bride. I didn't know anyone attending. Very expensive, over-the-top place, several hundred guests in this very Italian wedding. The maid of honor grabbed the mic at the cocktail hour, began her speech, rambling and drunk, quickly devolved into stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that that's basically what had killed her. Plus, Vinny will never give up his working girl habit. She was finally tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. Mamma mia. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid as frick. The place was overcrowded, you could barely move without bumping into someone else, and the heat was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti, and rolls. Not enough to even feed half the guests. Most people left after the first dance, and 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. When the wedding planner is crying, you know the day has spiraled out of control. I feel bad for laughing, but man, that's so true. I'd say that's a rare occasion for a wedding planner. The groom got so drunk the night before he couldn't make it to the altar at the ceremony. They still had the ceremony with only the bride and her party, plus the one groomsman who apparently didn't get wasted. Everyone was shaking their heads the entire time. The groom did make a singular appearance for a few seconds at the reception. He looked like a zombie and was wearing street clothes. And this was no trashy wedding, by the way. The bride was a professional dancer for a major label pop star, so that gives you the idea of the kinds of people that were in attendance. 200 plus people at the ceremony alone, probably double that at the reception. They divorced within 6 months. The father of the bride died suddenly 3 days before the wedding, pre-COVID. Daddy-daughter dance was mum, bride, and picture of dad. Same with walking down the aisle to give her away. Lots of tears, not many smiles. Even the bartender at the hotel knew the night before and was talking about it with me. It was a big wedding, over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and the restaurant. You know, the narrator was expecting a lot more of the stories in question to be about affairs. Nope, we've mostly just had a lot of honest-to-God unavoidable tragedies, some real act-of-God type things, or just horrible people in general. So thank you for this last story. We needed more scarcely believable infidelity to make this all a bit more surreal for us. But yes, it does have to be said that this sucks for the groom. Best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. At the last minute, her mum asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each thing. I tried to warn her that I simply didn't follow, but she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently, all her life she had wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset, so she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror and amusement of the crowd. Years afterwards, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Oh, is this the guy who screwed up my wedding? How are you?" I work at a golf course with a lot of history behind it. We do wedding venues inside the clubhouse, and the actual ceremony is held outside by the historic water fountain and a large pond. The first problem was the weather. I live in a high desert and it's very warm. A solid 90 degrees that day, and it was also pretty windy. So everyone was outside, no umbrellas and no ease-ups. The next problem, and probably the worst, was the golf cart incident. The bride and groom wanted to ride into the sunset on one of our golf carts, drive around a little bit on the course. To be fair, it's beautiful on the course during sunset. However, the cart had somehow gotten a nail in the tire went flat, the battery on the cart went crazy, and the cart ended up freaking out. It came to a complete stop from 15 miles per hour to 0. The wheels and mechanism locked up, almost seizing. Both the bride and groom, fairly overweight mind you, went over the windscreen and rolled over a few times. They were totally okay, just a few bruises, including the ones on their egos. So retrieving the cart wasn't fun. And last but not least, the power inside the clubhouse went out due to high winds. There was no after-party available. After the cake was cut, hardly any food was given out. Yeah, not a great day to cover for someone on your day off. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, the photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. You know where this is going. The bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee, but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and then threw up down her dress and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced. I felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom brought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine. Why spend a fortune on one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners too. So they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat pee that some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off, the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. And a bonus story, because even though it didn't ruin the wedding for the couple, it ruined it for the bridal party. I was a bridesmaid for my other friend. I flew across the world for over 10 hours to be there. I had to do the setup of the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, redo her bouquet because she didn't like it. A long, long list. The whole time she was rude and telling everyone within earshot that the bridesmaids just aren't helping me. Her maid of honor was absolutely bending over backwards to keep her happy, and instead of being grateful, she instead told her sister, "I should have asked you to be my maid of honor instead." She was pretty cold to me and kept asking if I'd lost weight. I said yes because I'd been ill, but I didn't think much of it. At the reception, her new husband took the opportunity to read the speech she clearly wrote for him to say to me, "We're so glad you fit into your dress," in front of over 100 people. I don't speak to her anymore, and neither does her maid of honor or any of her other bridesmaids. We attended a wedding for family members who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue, but it was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in the city we lived in an hour away?" They had all this food for 100 people, but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man and groom's brother just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently the groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove the cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. The reception went on as planned, she got wasted, and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They're divorced now. This is the tale of my elder cousin. He attended a wedding where the bride and groom got scammed by the wedding organizer. 1 hour before the wedding event, there was nothing in the room. No food, no decorations, just a few tables, and basically it felt like an unused ballroom. The bride and groom realized the wedding organizer scammed them, and the wedding organizer took the money to buy themselves a big old house. When the bride and groom decided to see the wedding organizer, they caught him sleeping in his house. It became national TV news here, and the wedding organizer got sued by a few brides and grooms that got scammed by them too. Well, at least this had something of a wider spread happy ending. People who take advantage of an event like this and then run away and leave the bride and groom who've likely blown their entire savings are just absolute monsters. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They'd been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd, I knew something was wrong. My friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she's overwhelmed. I immediately called my friend and asked what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out my friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, he and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those he and his wife had invited and told them to leave without telling his parents. They, of course, had a meltdown as we left. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back, but was in bad shape. Everyone was panicked the whole day and thought she drowned. By the time she got back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt, but it was very clear from the racy content that it wasn't her aunt at all. She'd been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after, $60,000 down the drain, one of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. A fight broke out between the father of the bride, brother of the bride, and some guy that just happened to be staying at the hotel. In reality, I don't know how much of a fight it was, more just the dad and brother beating up some guy. So anyway, they were both arrested. Cut to the bride sobbing at breakfast because her dad and brother spent the evening of her wedding in jail and now faced charges for what they did to this poor man. Hurricane Ivan. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday and the hurricane hit us dead center on Thursday. We were sitting around with no power on Friday and remembered that a neighbor was a pastor. So my partner and I just knocked on his front door and asked if he'd just marry us in the front yard. So the big church wedding was cancelled, but instead I got married in the front yard with chainsaws and stuff in the background. Been married for 17 years now. The groom's father got handsy with both the bride and his daughter, my then girlfriend, multiple times each. Ended up getting punched out by his son and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. What are the best-kept secrets that flight crews hide from us? As an air traffic controller, we're constantly swearing and yelling at pilots when we're not on the frequency, and when we get on the mic, we use our nice guy voices. One of my all-time favorites is the captain accidentally broadcasting his passenger briefing, welcome aboard, weather in Chicago, and so on and so forth, on the frequency instead of aircraft PA system. He blocked up the ground, ramp, tower radios, all of those for a solid 15 seconds. You automatically become the laughingstock of the airport when that happens. I was learning to be cabin crew at college, and in the event that someone dies on board, the cabin crew make it less obvious that they've passed. They put glasses on them, maybe a hat. Essentially, they dress them up as subtly as possible to not alert or panic the other passengers. Please don't disturb my friend, he's dead tired. I was only a month or two out of my IOE, or initial operating experience, at my first airline job, flying right seat in a regional jet. I'd just come back from the bathroom when the captain pointed out that several flight instruments on his side had failed, and he had reverted to using data from my side. He basically programmed his main flight display to start using data from the second independent system. Soon, however, that went bad as well. The autopilot disconnected, and here we are at 25,000 feet or so, in icing, hand flying off a tiny little combined last-ditch backup instrument called an IESI, an integrated electronic standby instrument if memory serves. We declared an emergency, asked air traffic control to point us in the direction of better weather, and tried to figure out what the heck was happening. Icing on both primary pitot tubes, maybe? Though that shouldn't happen because they're heated. In any case, we ended up making a perfectly safe landing after a diversion, and the passengers never had any idea that for a few minutes I was really concerned that things were about to turn very, very bad, and that we were down to our emergency backup gauge. That's the shortened version without most of the techno-babble anyway. Ooh, I've got an original one for you. There's this radio frequency we're all required to monitor. It's called GUARD. It's for emergency use, and it's designed for maydays and for air traffic control to reach aircraft that might have lost radio contact, or to relay messages from aircraft to other aircraft, stuff like that. Every day, this frequency is misused. You'll hear hundreds of professional aviators meowing, yelling obscenities at each other, making fun of one airline or the other. Often what sets it off is some poor guy accidentally transmitting his PA announcement to passengers to the GUARD frequency instead, followed by the very mature outbreaks for about 5 to 10 minutes. It is the worst on the East Coast. Just today I heard an airline aircraft trying to relay info about a medical emergency on that frequency through one of their fellow company aircraft. They couldn't finish any of their sentences without people yelling, "You're on guard! Meow! Nobody cares about you, passenger. Hey, you're on guard too, huh?" Oh wow, good to know that the people in charge of piloting these vessels and their hundreds of passengers are essentially behaving like kids on a World of Warcraft server when they're meant to be focusing on their instruments. The scariest moment of my day is when the flight attendant opens the internal bag door, which is the closet we all throw our overnight bags in, without calling us in the flight deck first. There's an alarm and master caution which gets me every time. Pilots here, we only get paid when the doors are closed and the pushback has commenced. If we're delayed or sitting with the door open, we're just as annoyed as you are. At altitude, we're constantly in contact with air traffic control and change to different center frequencies or control for other than US locations. We're also doing fuel checks to make sure the fuel burn isn't abnormal, dodging weather, and probably complaining about scheduling. Pilots are on their phones or reading the newspaper all the time. Ex-airline employee here, often we'd have someone on board with terrible body odor. You can set the temperature on one end of the cabin hotter, and it localized the smell to one part of the plane. If you see coffee filter bags hanging everywhere, it's because someone smells like an open butt somewhere on the plane. Flight attendants often talk about the hot guy in 23B or whatever seat the hot guy's in, and pilots screw around a lot in the cockpit. They'll take pictures, post on Facebook, watch movies. Automation has taken over a lot of the work on their long flights. I'm not an airline pilot yet. I just got hired by my first airline and I start class next month. But I've been a pilot for 6 years. I primarily teach Chinese airplane pilots how to fly, but I've done some passenger operations in business aircraft on the side. First of all the comments about pilots making cat sounds and Chewbacca noises on the guard frequency are 100% true. Also, when someone leaves an area and switches frequencies, they'll yell, "See ya!" and a dozen other pilots will key up yelling, "See ya!" one after the other. We also enjoy talking crap about people who say, "with you," "got 'em on the fish finder," or "any traffic please advise," and "tree" and "fife." Also, the things that scare passengers don't faze the pilots one bit. We don't give a crap about turbulence or having to do a go-around. The things I don't like are things you generally won't know about. Thunderstorm dodging, microburst alerts, ice, maintenance issues, stuff like that. I'm also a pilot. Sometimes the passengers can be having a nice, quiet flight in the back while the pilots are up front dodging thunderstorms and yelling their heads off. We'll not only transport dead bodies, but also live transplants like hearts and lungs. I particularly like the live transplants because we get to cut to the front of the line for takeoff, and we get all the shortcuts to our destination. And a tip for those who get motion sickness: try not to move your heads around. Pilots move their eyes instead of their heads to look at the instruments on the flight deck. Also, try to sit in a seat over the wing. This area of the plane doesn't rotate as much during climbs and descents. Sure, flight attendants can't do pilots' jobs, but pilots can't do flight attendants' jobs either. We aren't hired for our people skills. And don't take off your shoes to go to the bathroom. People pee on the floor all the time. My story started off with us blissfully unaware and ended with mild pant soiling. I was flying to France in one of those planes with the TV screens up front to show the flight path and where you currently are. I was just about to fall asleep when the captain asked over the PA if there was a doctor on board and if they could go to a specific seat number. I knew this was bad. The flight path changed to Canada and we had to make an emergency landing. We were stuck there for 2 hours. When we finally got to France, his entire row was quarantined off. I have no idea what the frick happened. Pilot is sleeping and co-pilot is flying, and there are dead bodies in the cargo. The source? My mum, who was a former flight attendant. Please don't fly with an ear infection or fluid in your ears. There's a chance you can rupture your eardrum. Flight crews are especially susceptible to this since we're constantly going through pressurization or depressurization when we work. As a pilot, I can tell you that most of the time, the passengers aren't given the full answer as to why a flight's delayed or cancelled. Airlines will typically blame cancellations on unrelated events like weather instead of mechanical issues so they don't have to pay for hotel rooms or meals. Also, chemtrails aren't real. For those of you who believe they are, give your head a shake. My uncle is a pilot. He says that most people don't understand how much of the airplane is run by computers. The pilots are necessary, but a lot of the elements of flying are automated nowadays. There's a joke about the Airbus A380 that goes, "The A380 comes with a pilot and a dog. The pilot is there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to bark at the pilot if he tries to touch anything." I worked with a pilot that was really old. He couldn't stay awake in flight. The first officer kept having to poke him and wake him up. We kept feeding him black coffee, but it didn't help so much. I asked him if he was retiring soon, but he said he couldn't afford it because our airline has no pension program and the pay scale is pathetic. It was pretty scary. There's a special frequency called guard that all aircraft are supposed to monitor. It's for emergencies or for when an aircraft ends up on the wrong frequency and the controllers need to get in contact with them to change to the right frequency. It is full of pilots meowing at each other and people accidentally asking for gate assignments and making other radio calls. See, there's that specific thing of pilots meowing on the guard frequency again. We have verification from 3 sources that this specific thing is happening. And although I can put the teenage boy behavior down to just that's how us men behave in general, I don't really understand the feline calls. Now, here's one of our commenters who seems determined to list everything that can or has ever happened on an airplane. Prisoners are transported on commercial airline flights sometimes, and law enforcement officers are escorting them. On days with low ceilings or visibility and overall crappy weather, we may be within minutes of making the decision to divert due to fuel, especially if we end up having to hold. This isn't to say we don't have enough fuel. Legally, we must have enough fuel on board to shoot an approach to our destination, go around, fly and land at an alternate airport if we have one, and even then still have 45 minutes of fuel remaining on board. Armed law enforcement officers on board sometimes not escorting anyone. Flying faster to get there earlier if a crew member has a commute to catch home. Chatting or joking with air traffic control if the frequency isn't busy. Delta pilots reporting light chop. Pilots making PA announcements over frequency rather than PA. And yes, the meowing on guard as well as other nonsense. Asking air traffic control how the rides are only to be told they suck at all altitudes. We try to get away from the turbulence, but it's not always possible. And we can't predict it and can't see it. We can only make educated guesses as to where it may be. It's hot back there, during the summer mostly, and we know it. We have it blowing as hard as it can and cold as it can. We're sorry if the plane still ends up feeling like baby's breath. Meanwhile, our air vents are keeping us cool if we're lucky. The iPad that you might see us using in the cockpit has all of our manuals, approach plates, maps, and checklists. Basically almost everything we need. It's really incredible. I just hope they both don't decide to brick themselves at the same time in the air. No, there isn't a single cloud in the sky where we are now. Meanwhile, our destination is encompassed by a massive thunderstorm. We don't like being late either, but we're paid to deliver living passengers. And we can't collect that paycheck if we're also dead. There's a chance your flight could be a pilot's very first flight in an actual jet. He could be fresh out of training, out of the simulator, and actually flying that jet aircraft. Scary, right? Well, that pilot could probably explain every single system of that aircraft in depth. Guys that have been flying the line for years? Maybe not quite as in depth. Oh, and that brand new jet pilot is flying with a Czech airman, who's there to further teach that new pilot about flying on the line. The air pilot can fly for a majority of the flight. We have to at least take off and land. Autoland isn't used for everyday normal operations. Different airlines have different rules on autopilot use. We must have the autopilot on above FL 200, which is 20,000 feet, unless it's inoperable. So we can hand fly up at that altitude, and sometimes we do. If we never go above that altitude, we can hand fly the entire flight, never turning the autopilot on, which we also sometimes do, and it's often encouraged to maintain piloting skills. You could be asleep in the back while the pilots are battling caution messages about some system that decided to throw a hissy fit. Planes often have broken equipment on board. It's just the nature of the business, and things just break. We can't always fix it, so there's an approved list of things that might be broken and how long they may be broken before they must be fixed. It could be something that doesn't affect us much, like brake temperature sensor that isn't working, or it could be something that requires the crew to account for it, like a thrust reverser being inoperative, or navigation GPS inoperable. Not stuff that makes the flight unsafe, just maybe more work for the pilots. Also, the captain can always reject an aircraft if he feels it's unsafe. If you ask us not to turn on the chemtrails this flight, we are legally obligated to comply. Yes, that's a joke, no one's asked, but if you do, I bet the pilots would get a kick out of it. Also, they're called contrails. We're not customer service, we don't know where your flight is leaving out of or how to help your problem. We'll try to help, but we'll usually try to direct you to a gate agent or actual customer service who can help you. We're not trying to be rude, we just really can't help you. Another person may be sitting up front with the pilots in what's called the jump seat. It could be a pilot commuting to or from work, a Czech airman observing, or an FAA jump-seater observing to make sure we're following regulations. Pilots and their families get flight benefits, same for flight attendants, and we can fly for free or discounted. We get on a standby list, and only after all paying passengers are on board, standby passengers may be boarded. It's hours of boredom interrupted by moments of sheer terror on every flight. When a fatal aircraft accident happens, all pilots mourn. Pilots are a pretty close-knit group. We might hate each other's guts at times, but we never wish each other the worst. The view from the cockpit is amazing. Sunsets, sunrises, lightning storms at night, flying over mountains and landscapes, it all never gets old. The captain and first officer are both fully capable of flying the aircraft. Each pilot is designated a role, either pilot flying or pilot monitoring. The pilot flying is the one actually flying, and the monitoring is monitoring what the pilot flying is doing to back him or her up. Usually, crews switch roles every flight, every 2 flights. So the captain is pilot flying for the first 2 flights, and then the flight officer is pilot flying for the next 2 flights. Yes, the flight officer or co-pilot actually does fly the plane just as much. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A former teacher told us a story that fits this question. Every year he'd make trips to Europe that were for an educational experience, or related to the subject he taught in one way or another. In reality, it was just an amazing way to spend 2 weeks in Europe. One year he took a student's brother with him, since he needed an extra person to have the minimum amount of required students. After the 10-hour flight, the flight attendant walked up to him and asked if said brother was a part of his group. He says yes. Apparently on the flight, this kid stopped the flight attendant and asked her to do the deed with him in the bathroom. She denied, but he continued to ask her several more times throughout the flight. It reached a point where she no longer felt anywhere near comfortable. She asked my teacher if she could notify the authorities and have him sent back to the States. He agreed. There were no immediate flights back home, so a distant relative of his had to be contacted. He stayed with the relative he had never even met for an entire weekend. He was then put on a flight back home the following week. In short, kid repeatedly asks flight attendant to do the deed with him during a 10-hour flight. She contacts authorities and he gets sent back. Honestly, win for you. He helped you get the numbers up to embark on your trip to begin with, then got kicked off for his awful behavior, hopefully learned a valuable lesson, and you didn't have to put up with him and likely all had a bit of extra space due to his absence. Nice. Flight attendants don't get paid on the ground. Only flying hours are paid. We are slave labor on the ground, and duties are continually added to our unpaid work time because the company knows they don't have to pay us. We show up 2 to 3 hours before we even start getting paid, and some days we'll work up to 14 hours and only get paid 5 or 6 of those hours. It should be illegal. Please be kind when you're boarding the plane and get all angry about your bags and stuff. The flight attendant is a volunteer, and while she's helping you on the ground, she's essentially doing you a favor. One split second of instinct combined with piloting skill decides if you land on the runway or on the side of it. Most of the runways are 45 meters wide, and on a gusty summer afternoon or during thunderstorms, I take God's name more than the Pope himself. Also, a smooth landing isn't necessarily a good landing. One can make a smooth landing and it'll feel good for passengers, but it could be a risky one if the pilot decides to use extra runway. Never shout at your pilot for a bad landing unless he crash lands. And if he does crash land and you shout at him, understand that you're alive because of him. As a wise man once said, better to thump it into the touchdown zone than grease it on 2/3 of the way down the runway. Bonus fact, many a times aircraft coming into land go back up in the air. This is a scary experience for many, as engines, after being relatively quiet for a while, will roar back to life and the aircraft is pulled back up. This is called a go-around. It happens because either the runway isn't clear, weather is something that can't be negotiated properly for landing, or the pilot isn't at the right place and right configuration. Go-around is actually something encouraged by all the senior trainers and authorities, as it's better to go back up in the air than be in a precarious position while forcing into land. So, whenever your pilot does a go-around, be happy that he's a safe pilot. We sat in a backed-up queue for hours in Denver one time. The weather had the airport socked in, nobody was going anywhere until this giant supercell cleared the end of the runway. During that time, suddenly there appeared a mechanic at the front of the cabin on the PA, holding up a 2-foot-long piece of metal he'd pulled from one of the tires. He explained that if the plane hadn't been sitting waiting, he might never have spotted it. It could have come flying out during takeoff, roll, and penetrated the plane's wing, igniting fuel or something like that. Everyone cheered him. What a hero. He possibly saved our lives. And to this day, I have no idea why they let him come on board and tell us this. My cousin is a flight attendant. It's not mid-flight, but airplane lines will fly attendants all over the country just in case they're needed somewhere else. My cousin had to fly out from Portland to Seattle and some other places all in one trip, never having to work. Also, if you're sick, you had to show up anyway and let the people in charge decide if you can fly or not. If you don't, you get 3 warnings, then you're fired. One of our instructors told us that he and his training buddy both fell asleep for about 45 minutes at the same time while gaining hours for licensing. The plane was on trim, which means a set altitude, not steering, in clear skies with 0 turbulence. They both swore that if they ever flew again, they would hand off sleep like handing off the controls. He told me that after both of them awoke, they were frickin' terrified. Neither had any idea what had happened or even if anything had happened. Luckily, it was just over the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, and at a low enough altitude where it wouldn't impact commercial airliners. Their trim was set before the nap, so they only gained a couple of 100 feet of altitude. But rest assured, they weren't happy with themselves. They immediately contacted air traffic control, verified their position, and turned around to go back to the airport, white palming the yoke the entire way. Oh, and this was at night too, because they needed night flying experience. There's a 600-page book in the cockpit with every single thing that could possibly go wrong, from a bulb going out to an engine falling off, a biohazard, or a bomb threat. Most airplanes don't even have a phalange. Flight attendant here, crop dusting, basically tooting whilst we walk down the aisle due to bloating. If you fly frequently, there's a high chance that a flight attendant has tooted right by your head as they walked down the aisle. The majority of the time, I'm not flying the plane, I'm on the internet writing stuff, just like I am right now. As an airline agent, I can't even tell you how often the crew is hungover. More often than not. Also, the flight attendants use their personal phones and Wi-Fi in flight, but that's probably not very surprising. I'm calling absolute bullcrap that you see pilots hungover often. We can't legally fly when under the influence of alcohol. That includes being hungover. If we look hungover, it's because we woke up at 4 a.m. to fly you out at 6 a.m. and we slept in a crappy hotel bed. If anyone ever has a suspicion that a pilot is flying under the effects of booze, almost all companies have the pilot get a breathalyzer test before that flight pushes back from the gate. Yeah, I think maybe the cabin crew and flight attendants could get away with it, but I don't think the pilots could, if for no other reason than the people in charge of an airline aren't going to want their expensive machinery to be at risk because of drunk flyboys. I saw inside a cockpit when we flew home from Orlando to Norway, and the pilot was asleep. I kind of freaked out for a second, but the attendee said it's normal. It freaked me out too much. Then the second co-pilot waved at me and said hello in some other language. I'm not a pilot or flight attendant, but I have a good working relationship with my teacher and his friend who are a mechanic and pilot respectively. One such thing that happened was that he had to fix the navigation mid-flight. An uncle who was a BA first officer, a captain's errand boy as he put it, on Concorde. In 1987, North Atlantic just south of Greenland, 1140 IAS, 55,000 feet. Per military radars, a flight of Soviet fighters were practicing intercepts against it. The captain himself didn't know until they were informed on the ground. I'd have gone to flight level 62 and got IAS for at least 1200 if I'd known. Nobody short of an SR-71 could intercept that. Former flight attendant here, landing gear got stuck on descent. We flew in circles for ages, just waiting to find out if we needed to crash land or not. Luckily, the gear eventually came down, and the passengers never knew something was wrong. One time, I accidentally spilled coffee creamer on a bald guy's head while he was sleeping during service. Myself and everyone else around him silently agreed to say nothing. He looked as if a bird had pooped on his head. I still feel guilty about it. Oh, and never drink the coffee. I've never seen those machines cleaned. Flight attendant here, we never actually leave the tarmac. People think we're flying, but we really just have big screens that cover all the windows to make it look like we're in the air. But in reality, we just shuffle the planes in and out of one hangar that's behind the airport that you can't see from the road. I'm not a pilot, and this didn't happen in flight, but I saw a pilot watching an adult movie in the cockpit, on a laptop while I was boarding the plane. It felt very inappropriate. Why were you banned from a store or restaurant? I once got barred from a pub for burping. I'm not crapping you, it was in the Conan Doyle pub in Edinburgh years ago. Our small group wasn't being disruptive or anything. My burp wasn't some intentional obnoxious display behavior intended to unsettle other people. It was actually quite discreet and simply the result of drinking carbonated beverages with nothing more to it than that. But we were sitting near the barman heard and we all got thrown out, and for objecting to it, initially thinking it was a bad joke. I got no crap full-on barred. Like I say, it wasn't some over-the-top eruption of a belch. It was the same kind you'd let loose in front of your own mother, followed by a quiet, "Excuse me." I thought at the time the barman was being a neurotic, over-assertive idiot, and my own time as a barman in the years since has only served to reinforce that impression. I got banned from the mall when I was younger because I wore an inappropriate shirt that I bought in the same mall. I had a Harry Potter wand keychain confiscated at TSA, the US airport security, earlier this year. I brought it in the same airport within the security zone on my last flight before that. Yeah, well, what if you started casting spells and stuff? I'm banned from a bar that a friend owns. I've played music in it at a steep discount because we were friends, donated to their fundraisers, got them loads of vintage glassware to use for free, promoted their events, even the ones with other musicians playing. It's because his wife can't stand the fact that he and I dated briefly 35 years ago. She melts down whenever anything triggers her about it and makes his life miserable. I had no idea. Apparently they were dating 30 years ago and broke up because he had to get a rain check on a date with her to be the witness at my City Hall wedding. They got back together 15 years after that. I found out about all this when making a Facebook post about the anniversary of that court date, and he messaged me to take it down. He explained the crazy and I complied and thought that everything was fine. Then I got invited to the bar for a private party of theirs 6 months later, and both of them are being horrible to me. I was very confused. I asked him what the problem was, and he said, "I don't like how we left things last December." And I was thinking, we? I went back and checked the messages. It seems right after he sent me the explanation, and before I responded apologizing for the triggering and saying I'd comply, someone blocked me in his account. So I think she went in and turned it off so he couldn't see that I was cooperating. So he thought that I blew him off. I sent emails, texts, and certified letters with screenshots showing what happened, but he's still angry at me. So, okay then. It's really sad as I loved that place and I loved playing there, and it's a nexus of our social group, but now I can't set foot inside. Well, sucks for you that got blocked off because of his crap bag wife, and sucks for this idiot that he can't see that maybe it's not a great relationship, that he'd be better off and happier if he just left. Sucks to suck, I guess. I was doing a history project on Poland, and it was well known that this teacher gave an extra letter grade for bringing in food from the country we were studying. A friend from my previous school brought me to a bakery that made kolaks that his family loved. I ordered one for my class, paying a deposit and specifying the day I was due to present. I ran in before school to get my order, and the woman behind the counter, the manager, told me that whoever took my order never sent it. There was no kolaks in the store. Despite me presenting my invoice and pointing out the date they agreed to have it ready, she refused to refund my deposit on the basis that we can make it for you tomorrow. I had to call the credit card company and dispute the charge that way. A few days later, my friend called me and asked why we were both banned from the bakery. I was banned from the mall arcade when I was a kid for holding all the whack-a-moles down. I was also banned from an arcade, but for an even more bullcrap reason. It was for picking up quarters. I was a very young kid and saw that people would drop quarters and just never bothered to pick them up, or they didn't know they dropped them. So I'd pick them up from around the machines, nothing dangerous, nothing suspicious, and I'd use them to play. I'm not talking about stealing quarters from people who were going to pick them up, but ones that are just sitting there on the floor with no one around, covered in cobwebs and sand. The attendant argued they weren't mine and belonged to the shop and that I was stealing. I can kind of see the point since it's private property, but I was 7 years old. I spent plenty of my money in the arcade, and I was just using all these quarters I found right back in their rigged claw machines. It was just a crappy thing to do to complain and ban me. All they had to do was say, "Don't pick up the quarters," and I would have stopped. Got a story about someone who wasn't my friend but who I used to run track with. He thought it would be hilarious to put a pebble inside a piece of gum and throw it out the window of the bus on the way to a track meet. He thought it would just stick to the windshield and be a nuisance to someone. It ended up shattering part of the windshield because we're in a bus going motherfrickin' 55 miles per hour. The person we hit followed the bus all the way to the track meet. The cops came, the kid was banned from track. I'm not sure if he was banned from the bus though. When I was 12, my favorite thing to do was play laser tag at the one laser tag place in our town. I'd go every Friday night and play for 3 hours or so. There weren't many other regular players, so nobody else was getting better at it like I was. After about a year, I was just wrecking everyone, and the owner ended up banning me from the place because it was driving away customers. It really sucked because it was my favorite activity, and I was just immediately cut off from it. 6 years later, I found a place in another city that had other players that played regularly, so I was able to start playing again with people at similar skill levels. I got banned from Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey several times in the early 90s. Back when I was in high school, season passes were like $40 or something, making it a no-brainer to buy one, if you intended to go at least twice. My friend and I probably went 5 to 7 days a week since we lived so close by. We knew the park and its operations better than pretty much anyone who didn't work there, and eventually we grew too comfortable with taking shortcuts through the employee area, trying to climb things we shouldn't, bothering other guests, and overall being a bunch of New Jersey teenagers, aka jerks. The thing is, the only IDs we had on us were our season passes, which we always assigned fake names for no pre-planned reason. In the summer of 1994, my pass said Oscar Schindler, for example. We eventually got in so much trouble they'd take our passes and tell us we were banned for life. Well, another $40 at the front gate and boom, back in as Itzhak Stern. They needed at that time to figure out the flaws in their system. This is how I got banned from Chuck E. Cheese. I figured out that I could take a ball from the game where you shoot the clown's teeth and use it at the skee-ball machine. The skee-ball machine would count the points but not the ball used, which enabled me to play forever with just one ball and max out the machine. I did it on 2 skee-ball machines before someone noticed and I got banned and kicked out. I got mistaken for somebody else while on holiday a few years back. I popped into a local shop to grab a sandwich and drink, and a staff member forcefully marched over to me and yelled, "You're not allowed in here, I've told you before," as she grabbed my sandwich and bottle of water from me and put them back. Of course, I tried to protest and explained that I'd never been there before and was a visitor to the area, but she gestured for the security guard to come over and escort me out and stood watching from a distance with her arms folded and a smug look on her face, occasionally shouting, "If she doesn't go, I'm calling the police." Thankfully, the security guard was a little more understanding of the situation and happily looked at my driver's license, which proved I lived in a different area. I offered to show it, but then he said, "But perhaps it would be best if you didn't come in here again anyway." I drunkenly stumbled into the big pyramid of wine glasses that were for some reason stacked on the side of the bar. After they all fell and smashed everywhere, causing a huge scene, I proceeded to tell the bartender that it wasn't me. 2 seconds later, I was in a headlock being dragged outside by a large bouncer. My longtime barber had oozing pink eye, and I merely told him I'd come back the next week. He told me not to come back at all. That's a sensitive man right there. You'd think that maybe if you were an ongoing regular and were concerned about catching the old pinky, he'd understand that maybe you didn't want to take your chances with him. Taking pictures of produce and price signs at a small grocery store while shopping. I was just trying to keep track of which of the stores had which food at cheaper prices so I could plan my shopping trips. They thought you were a competitor. It actually does happen. I worked at gas stations for years and had to check competition prices all the time. No biggie, but every so often I'd have to check an inside item price, like cigarettes or candy. It was very awkward and I felt like a criminal. I was banned from the library as a kid. Overdue fees. They let you go up to $70 before cancelling your card. I was an avid reader and my mum hated taking me to the library, always said she would and then changed her mind last minute. It was a 6-mile round trip, so I'd take a wheeled suitcase and get around 25 at a time. The books added up fast. I resorted to stealing books and returning them, and I'm pretty sure some of the librarians just turned a blind eye. They forgive the debt when you turn 18. I was banned from the college cafeteria for taking in a digital food safety thermometer and a copy of the state health department temperature ranges. They were consistently 20 to 40 Fahrenheit low, and food poisoning was a common problem. Nothing says, "We totally hear your legitimate safety concerns," like, "Get the frick out, you're banned." Feeding the seagulls. We ruined the entire upper deck's dining experience with a few French fries. Dozens, maybe hundreds swarmed. It was like a scene from The Birds. People had to evacuate. Back in the late 80s, I was in the Florida Keys with a group of friends. I got drunk and went to bed, and some of the guys went out bar hopping. The next morning, a deputy sheriff showed up at the place we were renting, told us to pack our things and he'd escort us to the county line, and we weren't to come back. So not only did I get banned from an entire Florida county, I never did get a straight story about what the guys who were at the bar did to get us banned. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend and I were banned for life from a casino in Las Vegas 20-something years ago. We had gone for his 21st, which was the week prior. Despite being of legal age, he looked appropriately 12. After being carded by a cocktail waitress for the 700th time, she recommended he go to the security desk, show his ID, and get a stamp on his hand showing he was 21. That way he wouldn't have to keep pulling out his license. Great! We go to security. They stamp my hand in 2 seconds, but start examining his ID real closely. They pull out the guideline for all of the state's driver's license, call over a supervisor, and finally they just say, "No, sorry, this is fake. It says under 21 on it." My friend at first calmly tried to explain that he turned 21 the week before and was under 21 when he got the license, which is why it was on there. He lived in one state, was going to college in another, and hadn't gone home to renew his license yet, but it wasn't expired, so it was valid. They said, "This is a private establishment, we're not comfortable with it, and we're asking you to leave." Now, he had a bad temper, which I knew, and he'd been drinking. I tried to defuse the situation and said, "Hey, screw this place, there's 100 casinos left on the strip, let's go somewhere else." He agreed and we headed for the door. Then 10 feet from the exit, I hear, "Screw it, I'm giving that jerk a piece of my mind." And 5 minutes later, we were escorted to a room off the floor, had our pictures taken, and we were told we were banned for life, and if we ever returned would be charged with trespassing. I haven't been back to Vegas since then, but if I do, I'd like to walk in to test their facial recognition software. I got banned from a local Kmart about 25 years ago for figuring out that if you just slapped the handle on the old twist-turn candy dispensers that took a quarter, it would give you free candy. Yeah, they call that stealing. They took my photo and everything. For the record, I did in fact know it was wrong, and I don't dispute on a technicality that I was stealing. It actually taught me a good lesson, honestly. Still though, I was just a kid and being walked into a security office for my photo was terrific. I tried to pay my cover or entry fee to a bar one time with $2 bills, and instead of taking my money, the bouncer told me to leave in a not super polite manner. I got banned from the local orthodontist because during an appointment my mum asked the doctor why her degree was from the US. We live in France. My mum was genuinely curious and had just wanted to talk, but for some reason the doctor took it really badly. He insulted my mum while I had the cheek retractor in my mouth and left the room. Fortunately, it was my penultimate appointment, and on the last one he was really aggressive and told us never to come back and to go see someone else for my siblings. I was banned from a Kmart. A friend and I went to the local one and took one of those air duster can things and froze bouncy balls with it. If you tip it upside down and spray it, super cold liquid comes out, cold enough to freeze things and even cold burn you. We froze bouncy balls and shattered them, on the ground. We did it to 2 of them. We were both banned. We were also 17 at the time. We were idiots. My family has been banned from the local Margot's Pizza for years because of my mum. She used to have some anger issues and also really loves garlic butter. When the Marcos forgot to include the garlic butter with the order, she called and asked them to deliver the single cup of garlic butter to our house. The Marcos reasonably said they can't do that, but she could come and get it. She stormed over there with our pizza and proceeded to smear the whole thing on their windows and counters. Haven't had Marcos since. On the one hand, I get being peeved. They could have done more, like maybe giving you a $5 gift voucher or something next time. But on the other hand, if you're really already driving over, don't make that journey some Pyrrhic gesture that removes the thing you love, the garlic butter, from your life forever. I used to work at a sushi restaurant. I got fired or banned because I told the manager that some of the food smelled like it was expired and maybe we should throw it out. Next thing I know, she's giving me my check and kicking me out. For legal reasons, I can't say the name, but I will say it's in the San Fernando Valley. They have 2 locations, one in Encina and one in Tarzana. Their name has 3 words. I went to a bar that had newly opened with friends. Ordered some drinks, cocktails and stuff. They took forever to make it, and after an hour we still didn't have all the ordered drinks, and some of the ones we did get were wrong. So we wanted to leave and requested the bill. They gave us the full bill, like they wanted us to pay even for the things we never got simply because we ordered them. And of course they expected a generous tip. We argued that we wouldn't pay for drinks that we never got. They called us liars and jerks, threatened to call the cops, and that from now on we were banned from that establishment. We told him we didn't mind and to go ahead and call the cops. When he went into his bureau to call, we quickly calculated what we owed, slapped the money on the table, and got the heck out of there. They went out of business like a half-year later and had to sell the bar. The new owner is okay. Went to a training course out of town when I was 21, and because it was a long journey, the entire group just booked hotel rooms for the night. I booked a single room for myself and got placed on the opposite end of the hotel from the rest of my group, who were all sharing with classmates. Only time I left the room after arriving was to get some dinner and then to go to the bar to watch a football match, where I sat with lecturers who accompanied us and spent the time chatting with them and the barman. Headed to bed at about 11. As I was heading up to my room, I passed my group who were heading out to a nearby nightclub. I had a quick smoke with them outside before they took my number as a kind of emergency contact for themselves. Anyway, next morning comes and I was down in the lobby for 7, grabbing some tea and some breakfast, and I went to ask for something at the reception, when I overheard a group of elderly people in front of me complaining at the desk about the noise last night. Apparently my group had come back completely off their heads and brought back a lot of friends from the nightclub. The manager had every room inspected before we left the property and was going to charge for any damages done. Honestly, it was completely understandable. Some rooms, from what I gather, were utterly trashed. I nipped out for a smoke, knowing my room was perfectly fine. Heck, I even stripped the bed down before I left to save housekeeping the bother. But nope, I got called to the desk and told I was being charged an extra $300 for damages done. I inquired about the damages and asked to be brought up and shown them. I went up, followed by the manager, a receptionist, housekeeping, and one other staff member, and they showed me the, quote, damaged room. They told me it was a disgrace and that we were barred, and the cops could be called if we refused to pay the damages. It was incredibly condescending and snobbish. But he shut up very fast the moment I asked if we should compare the time-stamped images I took upon entering the room for the first time the previous day to the current damage he was charging me for. I took my phone out and opened it and flashed the pics. He didn't even look at it. All the damage that I'd caused was there when I arrived the previous day and was at worst minor that any resident handyman could fix in minutes. The manager was looking to make a profit on a Tuesday night and was looking to con a group of students out of it and got too greedy and it cost him. I informed the lecturers and asked very loudly if I should indeed call the police due to them trying to scam us, but we were late for day 2 of the course, so I just left. Nobody paid. I filed a complaint after I left. The hotel was lovely, to be fair, and I tried to go back a few years later with my partner as a surprise getaway present for her, but wouldn't you know it, I was banned from the hotel. My uncle always told me to take pics when entering a hotel room, and obviously the same crap had happened to him previously. My roommates and I, along with a few friends, went out to a bar one night to drink. We had grown a single beautiful watermelon in our yard and brought him along to the party with us. Named him Walter Melon, pronounced Melone, snuck the watermelon into the bar and generally just passed it around and praised him for being a good melon. At first, the bouncers didn't care. They came up to us and just told us to be careful with it. Then one of my friends got pretty drunk and started holding it above his head and dancing with it. At this point, security decided they'd had enough of our shenanigans and tried to take it from us. My drunk friend agreed with them that he'd leave with the melon. A few minutes later, he made it back to the bar with the melon under his jacket. He'd snuck in through the back and avoided the bouncers. Once they saw the melon again, they got pretty angry and kicked us all out. We argued for our melon back, but to no avail. Rest in peace, Walter Malone. Funnily enough, there was this other group of guys who had left the bar and had seen or heard about the melon incident. As we were all hanging outside the bar waiting for an Uber, they drove past, stopped, and handed us a pumpkin. So, we ended the night melonless, but with a new pumpkin friend. We got banned temporarily, but I could probably go back. Sounds like it wasn't entirely a fruitless endeavor. And I say that because I'm fairly certain that technically a pumpkin is a fruit. Shame about your melon compadre, though. Rest in peace, Walter. A bar owner of a dangerous dive bar where I got super drunk and enlisted the help of 10 regulars to beat the crap out of one of my friends. He was hospitalized and they double-charged me before he left, and then I was banned. It's been years, and to this day we still don't know what started it. Someone got jumped behind the bar nearly every Friday night, so it was only a matter of time. I talked it over with my police officer buddy, and they sent officers to request the recording of the parking lot from that night. The tapes were apparently missing, and we were crap out of luck, wouldn't you know it? I just got thrown out of a restaurant for shouting at another diner. She had been insulting her child loudly for 10 minutes. The kid didn't do anything in response and just kept eating. You can't eat properly. You're gross. I don't know what she thought the kid was doing wrong, maybe not using a fork properly? Twice the woman did that thing that people do to mock disabled people. You know? Ugh. And this was all loud enough that nobody could ignore it. All of the other diners were turning round to glare at her. I was wondering how to intervene. There was too much anger in my mind. Then her partner said something quietly about how she was spoiling everyone else's lunch, and she snapped back, "It's your fault for not restraining the kid." At this point, I lost it. I jumped up, pointed at her, and shouted, You are the problem." And I told her that children should be encouraged and praised, that she was setting the kid up for a lifetime of feeling worthless. And how dare she treat a child that way? I don't remember what else I said. I was full-on berserker angry by this point. "Excuse me," said the staff. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Oh, of course. I'm sorry," I said to the staff. "I'm sorry," I said to the other diners, and then, "But I'm not bloody sorry to you." I don't think that woman will change. I expect she'll punish the child when they get home. But the child will never forget this day. Hopefully they'll know that someone opposes her mother, that someone can fight in their corner. That was 1,000 times worth getting thrown out of a restaurant. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.